policy around these things. We must acknowledge, though, regional integration remains low, with inter-regional trade representing just 10% of total trade in Southern Africa, compared to 60% in Europe, 40% in North America, and 30% in the Asian area, in Asia. Now, regional trade is important because I think the cost could be lower, logistic cost could be lower, I mean, in promoting regional trade. And probably with the current things that are happening, the deglobalization, it's probably the new area for growth for our industries. We need to deal, therefore, with the barriers for trade, both infrastructure ones and the soft barriers for trade. To address these barriers to trade, we must pursue regional integration and support South African businesses as they move into regional markets. And that's interesting. I mean, it's in South Africa, that's probably one weakness, by the way. Most countries, most South African companies doing business in the region will all tell you that there is no systematic support for South African companies doing business in the region. So we need to think about how do we do that as a country. We need also to operationalize continental free trade area, ratifying some of the agreements that have been signed and probably left without attention, including the sensitive ones. The fourth area is we need to build a 21st century economy. We need to build future competitiveness in higher value productive and services sector. And unfortunately, deindustrialization has seen us lose capability in design and engineering services, which we need to rebuild if we are to retain global competitiveness. We must build those industries and skills which are most resilient to automation and technological disruption. And that's the kind of focus in our training. We should, the skills that are relevant to automation and technological disruption. Completing the transition from analog to digital signal network is critical, which is again a government problem. And again, it's again a big issue that government must deal with. Relieving spectrum constraints would also drastically lower the cost of data. Because I think until we deal with the spectrum issue, data will remain expensive in this country. And we have to find a way of dealing with that issue, as it were. But it's also important for competitiveness. In addition, South Africa urgently needs to overhaul its patent system. Now, if you are going to drive innovation, your patent system becomes very important. And I think there are a whole range of things I could go into a bit more detail in that area. We need to deal with that as a matter of urgency. And now, broadly speaking, we will never transition to high productivity competitiveness if we do not overhaul our education system. So education is fundamentally important to everything that I've said. The Economist declared South Africa to be one of the worst education systems in the world, despite the spending of 6.4% of GDP, compared to, if you look at Europe, which is, they spend 4.8% to GDP. Indeed, government delivery on education has been a chronic failure of the last 3 decades. This has resulted in a structural skills deficit in key sectors with high growth potential. In fact, if you think about it very hard, we're still sustaining a dual education system. You live in a township, and in a village, you get village and township education. And it also implies that when you go to the labor market, you actually are going to a particular segment of the labor market. And we can't have an excuse on education. And I can see that people go out in the streets and fight about many other things, etc. But I think the genuine and fundamental fight we need to take in this country is making our education function better for the poor. But this will require major investment in early childhood education first and foremost, because I believe that for many of us, the youth and the children and etc., the first 3 years of schooling determine what you're going to be in life, basically. The kind of care and support you receive in the first few years of life actually condemn you in life, basically. So we do need to think about, because if you have a strong foundation for children to succeed in later years, we need also to reduce dropout rate fundamentally. The country will require thousands of well-trained maths and science teachers to enter the public education system in the next decade, which necessitates competitive salaries to attract graduates and high-quality training programs. Reviving teacher training colleges is an important first step towards this goal. Moreover, preventing teacher absenteeism and enforcing higher standards of teacher performance will only be achieved if we start stronger collaboration between teacher unions, authorities, communities, etc., etc. We've got to do something about education. And it's not about slogans, by the way. It's about going to the ground and ensure that the school in the village works. It works because everybody is interested in ensuring that it works. It works because the whole ecosystem is built to ensure that there is community support and everything else that's necessary. We must reverse the trend of non-performance of our basic education if we are to succeed into the future. The fifth point is we must influence multilateral agenda setting. As a country, we need to develop a fresh and pragmatic approach to international relations, taking into account the rapidly shifting geopolitics and economic dynamics. And part of it is that international relations is not a show. It's not a show. It's not about like parading and red carpets, etc. It's not about that. I mean, it's not a show. It's not form. We need to look at the content of it. We need to be more proactive in influencing multilateral agenda. Currently, we are at something of a crossroads in multilateralism globally. There is a widespread acknowledgement that the global growth model that has dominated policy since the 1980s has not worked, has failed in terms of generating inclusive growth. The main global outcomes now are rising inequality, deindustrialization, stagnant household incomes, and increasing social discontent, with the consequent dangers of populism. This is now increasingly recognized even by those agencies, global agencies, that supported the policy that has been pursued. Your IMFs and the World Bank also have come to the same conclusion. The world appears to be wavering between two alternatives. Either a wave of backlash and deglobalization with nationalism and market segmentation and national priorities set against globalism, or transition to a very new kind of globalization, sometimes referred to as globalization 2.0. Clearly, option one will be disastrous for us. We therefore need to be deliberate in shaping new forms of engagement, global engagement as a country. We need to use better platforms such as BRICS to shape how the new world order can be regulated. Kickstarting life into regional and continental bodies such as SADC and the AU also becomes very important to influence the new agenda. At a minimum, the new global agenda should entail four things, I think. I mean, and this is work done by a number of people globally, including Michael Spencer. The first is develop a coordinated global fiscal stimulus to aggregate demand as done by G20 in 2008. Because I think aggregate demand drives growth and investment. So if your aggregate demand is low, it also follows that growth and investment becomes low. So there has to be a global coordinated effort to kind of stimulate aggregate demand globally. The second is channel the extraordinarily large pools of global liquidity into infrastructure for rapid urbanization of the world using multilateral risk mitigation methods. Again, I mean, there's a lot of work being done to show that there is a lot of money in the world. There is a lot of money in the world. And I think what's needed is a broader coordinated efforts to mitigate the risk associated with using this money for investment, as it were, in infrastructure in particular. I mean, the studies also show that in probably the next coming few years, 75% of the global population will be in cities, whether this is comfortable or not. It has huge implications on infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. I was saying to somebody recently that actually, if you look at our cities, as it were, with a more progressive view, you can't really say that you are in PE or Xhosa land, so to speak. The dynamism that you find, both culturally and otherwise, show you that actually our cities are growing, and as they're growing, they are breaking away from monolithic concept of cities and from a cultural perspective. They're becoming really dynamic multicultural centers, so to speak. We need to develop mechanisms to ensure wider and intergenerational sharing of benefits of future technological advances and global integration. And we must understand that the emphasis on education is also ensuring that the youth of today benefits from growth of today. That's the only way that you ensure that the youth benefits from the current growth, is ensuring that we invest more, both as private sector and public sector, ensure that we get better outcomes in education. It's an insurance that they benefit from the current growth, so that into the future they can actually utilize and deploy those skills to create wealth for themselves. The last point is to look creatively at how losers of globalizations can be better compensated. Because you can't, I mean, it's your middle class in advanced countries, and some of in our case, we have not been able to move with the same pace. I think we need globally to look at mechanisms of ensuring that. Major global powers such as China and Germany appears to be embracing the need for a new globalization deal. But without active participation of the world's economic and military powerhouse, the US, a new global deal probably is still born. The sixth point is we must build resilient institutions. As a country, we need to build strong and enduring institutions to make us resilient and prepared for uncertain and volatile future. This requires us to think afresh about agency, and especially on the specific and complementary roles of the state, markets, and civil society. And that's something that I think we need to think about probably in a more practical way in our dialogue of these issues. Specifically, what is required is a strong state which can lead economic restructuring and deconcentrate economic ownership and grow productivity in new sectors and new entrants as well. Secondly, dynamic and socially conscious private sector which continuously innovate and grow productivity, but also understand that they have a huge social responsibility to deal with inequality. Thirdly, a strong civil society which can champion socio-economic justice, defend democracy, and guard against corrupt capture by elites, often under the guise of indigenization. Because I think that's a big issue. In all countries where we are transitioning and indigenization is a big issue, corruption and state capture becomes a big threat if we don't guard against the elites using the state to usurp power and resources. The fourth, political leadership capable of putting the interests of long-term prosperity above short-term expediency and the immediate needs of political business complexes. And I think political parties, the big lesson that we have in South Africa over the last 10 years, if there's any lesson to make out of the last 10 years, is that you must actually be careful about the amount of power that we give to political parties. I think society must understand that if society is not organized, party barons are likely to mess you up. And I mean, think about it. For the longest of time, most of the things that happened in this country happened, and there was always political justification by some political parties. And so mobilizing civil society and ensuring that we build consciousness across sections of society is critical in dealing with some of these issues. The seventh point is building state capacity. Most worrying, of course, of all the things that I've said is that the state has been weakened over the past 10 years, in part by corruption, but also in part generally by just hollowing out of strategic and technical capability. So rebuilding the legitimacy and capability of the state will require fresh thinking on the role of state and market, as I was trying to point out. The state, you need a state that's able to drive innovation, strengthen private sector actors in strategic sectors, and support expansion of new capabilities and knowledge, but also ensure that it drives a social agenda that deals with inequality in a very direct and strong way. Finding a clear path through in this turbulent terrain will also require a state that is legitimate. And probably we don't, you know, one of the experiences that I had one time at addressing some forum elsewhere. So people looked at me as I finished talking, and one person says, "Hey, what you're saying sounds nice, bro. You need to tell bro, Javana na yo, bro. And in trust, man." And that's the problem that you have. I mean, you need a state that is legitimate. I mean, that is really can stand up and articulate positions, and we can believe in that tomorrow they will still drive those programs. They will not turn around and that, again, in order to have that, you do need strong civil society to ensure that you ensure that people account. The eighth point I would have made is that we must agree on how to achieve inclusivity outcomes. We have probably the most unequal society in the world. We are amongst the most unequal societies in the world. We do need to look at the whole social policy architecture and economic architecture in our country, to look at how do we build a different architecture that supports reducing inequality in our space. And again, the debate about inequality and growth is an interesting one. But sometimes people think that when you talk in reducing inequality, therefore growth is not important. I think both are important. Just be careful of that. That you need to ensure that our economy grows, but as it grows, we must also transform it and deal with issues of inequality, as it were. I always use the term that these things are complex. I mean, these are not just easy questions. And that's where I think sometimes I get worried by populism. Because populism knows no complexity. You want simple solutions for everything. And we must understand the complexity of some of these issues. As a country, we have a number of catch-22s, over catch-22. I mean, the first is reducing inequality and poverty requires faster growth, but faster growth is undermined by the social tensions and risks associated with inequality. How do you navigate that? Significant redistribution of income and assets, such as land, may reduce inequality, but will also reduce the likelihood of investment and growth. So you need both, effectively. You must redistribute land, you must redistribute assets, as it were, but at the same time, you must ensure that you grow the economy as you do that. Conversely, excessive protection of property rights may be good for investment and growth, but will just reproduce existing race-based inequalities and resultant social tensions. So, I mean, these are real issues that all of us must actually engage with, as it were. The other catch-22 relates to our institutions. So the institutions those institutions that are required to drive change. Inclusive institutions are needed to restructure the economy towards more shared and sustained prosperity. But whether we like it or not, elite interests controlling rents actively prevents the necessary innovation and institutional change. You will always have a scenario where those with vested interests will oppose changes in institutions. They will always oppose making our institutions stronger because it serves them to have weak institutions. And who benefits from having a weak police force? It is the criminal. If our justice system is not working, who benefits? So these are some of the things that I think as we navigate these waters, we need to be cognizant of. My last point is we must put the youth at the center of our development agenda. We must accept that I think there's a need for us to regain the lost ground. And the lost ground in the sense that if you think about it, the youth in South Africa has become disenchanted with our development trajectory. Addressing this, of course, is not an easy thing. It requires dialogue and engagement, robustly, not just in populist terms. We need to really start using platforms like this to engage each other more. But also, I think, broader, beyond these platforms, we need to engage. It also requires us to immediately address the objective circumstances of youth, which in a very real sense allows populist sentiments to thrive. Almost 6 million young South Africans, or 1/3 of all those aged between 15 and 34, are unemployed. A problem which has its roots in the performance of the education system and the need to restructure our economy quite substantially. Young people struggle to find employment because of structural constraints, such as an entrapment in poverty cycles, the legacy of apartheid spatial geography, an inability to access places of work, and lack of certification. And I saw Harambi is going to be speaking here, and I'm sure he will probably deal with some of those issues because I think the program, in part, was designed to respond to some of those issues. Major new investment must be made in technical and vocational education, training colleges, and work readiness programs that are targeted at actual skills gap identified by business and industry. Finally, a new grant should be introduced to provide young job seekers with the means to cover the cost of their transport, short-term training, and job preparation. So you do need to, as a country, to build an ecosystem to support youth and in terms of accessing jobs and finding employment, as it were. And I'm using the term deliberately ecosystem because you need different elements of that coming together to ensure that we create a better environment for youth employment. But as we say all of these things, I think the biggest problem is a challenge is that youth must be at the center of developing solutions. You must be at the center of developing solutions to the immense problems that our economy and society faces. This must begin by opening up spaces where organic youth intellectuals can grow and thrive. Because I think that's fundamental. Building youth intellectuals is fundamental project that we must embrace. Because we need to change our vision and mobilize youth in a different direction. And that must be done by youth itself. As older leadership, and this is probably a critique that we have, as older leadership, we must refrain from over-influencing leadership contestations amongst the youth. Because part of the problem is that when you look at our organizations, part of the problem is that we have youth structures that mirror older leadership that influence their rise to power. And that is counterintuitive. I think we need to ensure that we allow leadership contestations amongst the youth to happen freely, and so that organic intellectuals from the youth sector begin to lead. Because what we need is a socially legitimate, critical, inspirational youth leadership that consistently and deliberately influences our policy agenda and hold us to account. And that's probably the bigger debate, quite frankly, because I think in South Africa you have this thing that most youth organizations are linked to political parties. And the result is, of course, increasingly also, I mean, we have a similar experience, of course, with all other formations. But the danger sometimes is that the problems that you find in the political organizations then transported to youth organizations. And obviously, because you are youth, you double them or triple them. And that's I think we need to do, as part of the conversation, to think about a broader youth front, in a sense, that allows integration of broader youth and in an agenda that is coherent, as it were. I think moving forward, I think the experience elsewhere is demonstrating that until society connects better, and I'm saying society connects better, and outside of just what I call the dense political parties, you break that a little bit, and you have society connecting in solving its own problems and finding solutions and influencing policy. Because think about it, education is important good education is important for everybody, isn't it? A good hospitals are important for everybody. So it should not be a matter of where you're sitting to support a cause of building a good public health system, a good public education system. My last point is that I think we've over-borrowed from the global multilateral institutions in terms of policy discourse. I mean, we've established youth desks, establishing youth commissions, youth councils, and it's trying to implement youth mainstreaming. And these are nice concepts that are sitting in multilateral policy institutions, guidebooks about how to go about driving youth. The question we must ask ourselves, are they effective? In our case, are these the tools that we need to use? So part of I'm saying we do need a more disciplined youth. We need disciplined youth structures, very clear and effective in what they do, very conscious about the tasks that they need to play. Can I shut up and sit down? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mcebisi, then for your address. I think it forms a really good foundation then for even the speakers coming up afterwards, who are still going to be discussing then on the approaches and paradigms to economic inclusion of young people, and also enterprise development as a form of employment opportunities for young people. So I'm hoping we keep in mind then all that we've heard at the moment, especially how we've positioned then South Africa as part of then that broader global community which we're a part of, and how we've looked at the hindrances and also the limitations that South Africa has in terms of being able to meet then global standards of economic development. I'm going to take a round of hands, and then I'm going to ask anyone who wants to engage then with this particular thought afterwards to try and hold or write down their question. and then we can then group them together for the latter speakers that will speak afterwards. So let me take the first round. All right, I'm going to take just the first hands that I saw. I'm going to take them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with Musa. In that order, please.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm so tempted actually to ask Datu Jonas about the 600 million rand and the Guptas. But yeah, I don't want to degenerate. Good afternoon. I am Thando Nkala, and I'm a student at this university. Datu Jonas, I appreciate that your topic or your discussion was around the global trends in economic development, but I just want to perhaps exploit the platform to raise something that is not in that discussion. And I do this because I'm aware that you've been appointed recently as a special envoy for investment for our country. And really the question I want to ask is that, you know, we have quite often these programs or these initiatives of raising money and investment for our country. But how much of it really does find itself going to rural areas and townships specifically? And I ask this because, I mean, again, as I say, often we hear that there are these great initiatives of bringing and attracting investment for our country, but how much of it really translates to the changing of the lives of our people in particular? And when I say our people, I speak specifically for the poor, majority black South Africans in the rural areas, with a specific focus to young people and women in the rural areas. And I know that you mentioned something along the lines of the statistics that in a number of years' time, you will see that the population will have urbanized, which is fine, but I don't think that should detract from saying we should still have some form of rural economic development, some form of investment in the rural area. So that's just my question to you. And I speak because, I mean, we find ourselves in cities here in university, but majority of us here come from rural areas and townships. Never mind the fact that when census comes, you are counted at SSV or wherever you are staying, but you're actually a person who's from a rural area, and these things affect us. And when we go back home, you actually go back to a home that hasn't really reflected the progress or the moving forward our country elsewhere has actually made in other places. So yeah, that's just my contribution. Thanks.
Thank you for that question then.
Good afternoon. My name is Nati Dwai. Mr. Jonas, thank you very much for your presentation. In your presentation, you used the words we must. And I accept that in reference to issues that we can perhaps address, we shall invoke the Tumamina spirit, and we shall. But my main concern is regarding the state in which you have a past experience with. And I'm just curious, in the issues that you articulated and you addressed, are your former colleagues aware of them? If they are aware of them, do they have a plan? If they have a plan, do they have some form of conscious or guilt conscious that something needs to be done? You know? So what's the level of psyche that's happening amongst yourselves, or used to happen amongst yourself at government level regarding these issues? Because, I mean, it's good and well for you to articulate them to us, and it really raises one's eyebrows, and I'm really concerned. But there's so much that I can do in respect to my own life. Whereas you are in a space previously where people who are there are entirely responsible in ensuring that at some level something can be done. So if you were to read this speech to them, would they understand what you are saying? And if they understand, would they have a plan? I mean, what would happen next? Would they feel sad? I mean, so it's concerning because what you said are common factors, common realities, but to the people who are responsible in taking decisions, how far does it become a realization in their minds that, okay, these are South African problems? Thank you.
Thank you so much. In that order, colleagues.
Greetings to you again. My name is Andy Swakaliba, and I'm an unemployed graduate. What I would like to say to Utata Ujonas, it's more like a statement. Yes. Utata nailed the problem at its root, education, because most of us, or some of us, come from families that our parents did not receive education. So they had a dream for us to be a graduate. But in us going to our local schools, they didn't know or understand what we were taught. They thought for us getting matrics and going to university will get employed after. But it didn't happen because of the poor education that we have received in high schools. And I think it's one of the problems we are facing today as unemployed graduates, is that we manage to work hard in our high schools, and then we manage to get our certificates, degrees. But when you take us into the work environment, into a labor, there are skills that we do not have, as university couldn't cover that up. It was supposed to be covered in the basic education in high school or in primary school, that we are fit for the work environment. And also he mentioned us being part of our development, which is one of the fundamental teachings of social development, that you put people in their own development, that they might have solutions. Here we are sitting today in this table, and also unemployed graduates around the Nelson Mandela Bay. We want employment, but also like our community to grow and prosper. So I think today and moving forward, this is one of the solutions, that you take us as unemployed graduates, you put us into a program whereby we're not only finding our work or getting income, but we also involve in developing our community, that we make sure that moving forward for the future, this doesn't happen again here in PE, in the Eastern Cape, and also in South Africa, that we have graduates that have a skill and a qualification, but are not being able to enter into the labor market. Thank you.
Sibonga sis. I noted 5 hands, number 4 and number 5. I will remind you, colleagues, of the lingering questions that were already posed by Utatumcebisi Jonas on pursuing the right policies for growth, and also whether or not we have the necessary leadership to be able to implement then the kind of growth that we want to see. So I'm hoping that we remember those 2 questions in formulating our own, that we're not repeating on top of those. Thanks.
Okay. Molweni nonke endlini. NdinguKazimla Kambongwe. And the question I have is based on listening about when you're clarifying the economic goal of South Africa. Now, there's one thing that came on as challenging to me. You keep on talking about the low-end jobs that are keep on going to certain parts, like these companies, how Nike did in China, how Glencore is operating in other northern parts of Europe, how Steinhoff operated here in South Africa. So my question is, why is government relying so much on private sector investment? Because private sector investment comes with a lot of terms and conditions. And those terms and conditions are gonna dilute the very same policies that we agreed to uphold and work towards. So now if you're gonna go foreign and ask for international diplomatic investment relations, when you go to these companies, they're gonna give us terms and conditions that are not in line with our national development plan. But however, the government still accepts those. Why is government still relying more on private sector investment rather than sustainability within its public sector investment?
Our final question is going to come from the gentleman on that side.
Good afternoon. Dingo Musa Mao. I I have a bit of a comment and a question.
I ask you, Musa, to just limit yourself to just the question, please.
Okay. Tatu Mcebisi spoke of is South Africa not possibly gaining as much as India and China from globalization and stuff. Recently, I'd come across a video of some white guy who was explaining something that he calls being an economic hitman. And Kule, in that video, he speaks of how they will identify a country that has got resources that they want, that they covet, and they will make a loan from the World Bank to those countries. And rather than the loan going to the country to develop the people of the country, it is going to go there and benefit certain corporations that I would like to assume they also own. So, for instance, let's say they want the minerals that we have in South Africa. They will come and finance a mining company that is here that does not belong to the people of the country. So as a country, we are indebted to them, but in actual fact, the money didn't even come to us. Like there is no development happening on our side. Now, you speak of how we are trying to make that kind of institution to develop us as a people. Meanwhile, there are people who have those kinds of intentions. And you spoke of how, Umzakelo, if we get to have the land back, we are going to scare away investment. Where do you intend for this investment to come from? The same people who want to take from us and leave us with no benefits at all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those questions. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask you then, Dada, to just lump together the answers and also your closing remarks.
I think there are specific one or two questions that I would want to respond to. I think the first, you know, the problem is that, am I right, Tanukolo? No? Yeah. When you talk about the metros and urbanization, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're undermining rural development until you take that out of your head. Because think about it, let's take Eastern Cape as a particular point, because I think it's important that we become specific. What is rural development in the Eastern Cape? Now, without generalizing. Now, for me, rural development in the Eastern Cape means that you must deal with, can I call it the Transkei question? Secondly, you must deal with the Karoo question. Those are the two issues you deal with, quite frankly. Now, the Transkei question, if you want me to use that term, is about what kind of infrastructure do you need to build anew in order to ensure that you generate growth in the area. So now, for me, there are a couple of things. The one is that if we're really serious about it, is that we need to lobby for the coastal road, opening up the coastal road in the Transkei. Because we are not going, I mean, this is a beautiful area, environmentally and otherwise, it's a nice area. But your coast, there's no road that takes you to the coast. So if you think about it, connecting Pine Town right on the coast might be the first break of ensuring that there's real development happening. The second area that you must deal with is the fact that the intersection between rural and urban, it's one continuum, by the way. And if you look at it from a productive perspective, that whatever you produce and in many instances meets your demand and it goes to service the demands in the urban area, there's an integration. Your growth of urban areas is important for your development, the development of rural areas. So you must understand that. So the second problem in the Transkei question is that you have, if you take Port St. John's, when it was developed, they were envisaging that it will service about 5,000, am I right, Sue? 5,000 people. That's what it was done for. we can be liberal and say 10,000. But Mthatha was done for 10,000. That's what they thought it will be a town for 10,000 people. Now, the rest of the people were said to be in villages. Your problem now is that population has grown more than 10 times since the time the last town was developed, which was Port St. John's. So naturally, any country will see that there is a need for another or a couple of towns built along the coast, so that you direct settlement patterns and you direct development in the area. Now, it requires thinking, which I think increasingly is disappearing. It requires that we must think about it and try to do it, you know? Because it's not, I don't agree that it's a money problem, because if you think about it, we have the money, the province has the money, national has the money. Somebody must lobby for it. If somebody can have how train, it doesn't, which probably makes very little sense. But how much more opening up the wild coast? For me, that's an investment, by the way, bro, where you go and mobilize and have an agreement that with the state and interlock with private sector and everybody else to ensure that we prioritize opening up the wild coast. But as we do that, you develop towns in the area. Your third area in the Transkei is that Transkei, historically, its growth of the area has been education and health. The largest number of hospitals in this province are sitting in the Transkei. So if you're thinking about a new strategy moving forward, just make the damn schools work better. And make the hospitals more better in terms of management, etc., etc. And make the logistics around health your center or piece of development, and of course a bit of agriculture. Because many of us have this myth that Transkei could be the basket of the Eastern Cape. In other words, it will be the center for agriculture and so on and so on. It's only, I can tell you now, research has been done from Tomlinson when the place was established to many others after him. The only thing that seems to be thriving in the Transkei, livestock in case. Am I right? It's livestock that's thriving. Because the bulk of the livestock population in the Eastern Cape is sitting there. So when you talk about rural development, Chief, it's not just about saying you want to go to that place that's called rural and develop. It doesn't mean that. It actually means that you have to do it within a context of a strategy for the province. And that strategy should be about addressing what I'm calling, I could have called it the Bantustan question. Because effectively, what you have is what it was. In fact, we have almost like, even the education, those schools that used to be the stars in the province, in that area, have gone down. Even the hospitals that at some point were good have gone down. So the point I'm making is that I think you need to think strategy for the area. It includes investment, by the way. You would have to attract investment. You'll have to do a whole range of other things that you need to do. Your second rural question is the Karoo. And the Karoo question is a different one. I would argue there are two issues. It is the land issue and the issue about water. And again, you think about it, how many farms were given to people through restitution in the area? And why have they failed? So I would start there in debating the issue. And therefore you would start saying, maybe we need an on-farm management support to ensure that those who receive farm, they work. We need marketing support and infrastructure support for farms and so on and so on. We also need to embark on a drive of ensuring that increasingly you have new entrants in farming and ownership of land and farms in the area. Different proposition. The last one is water. You have to solve the water infrastructure issue for the Karoo. And again, I don't think it relates to billions and billions. Again, it's some, one time when I was working in the Eastern Cape, I asked the guys at Exec, we're at Kliplat, eh? What is it called now? I don't know what it's called. Kliplat. We're in Kliplat one time. So we're sitting in a meeting and the mayor is going on about unemployment. He's going on and on and on about unemployment. So I was with an Exec guy and I asked him, Chief, just give me the numbers. How many people are unemployed here? So to my shock, it was 1,400. When you say 100% unemployed at the time, you mean 1,400 people in the area are not working. So then I was asking, but what is the budget of the municipality? So he gave me the figure. So I said, but you can take 10% of the budget of the municipality and pay them every month 1,000 to 2,000. They'll be okay, and then give them work to do in the township. Because the problem is that sometimes when we talk about issues of employment, unemployment, we complicate them as if unemployment in PE and this is the same as Cliplat. It might be different. But these guys receive a budget, and you go to the salary of the municipality, of the municipal manager, 1 million. You go to the car that the person drives, Mercedes-Benz, the mayor drives a Mercedes-Benz. Wow, all these things. So your problem, I think the problem is that and for me, the issue of my last point, but the issue is until, and I'm also coming to your question about what people in government, Chief, we need a campaign to make society understand what government does. We need a campaign to ensure that when we talk about the budget, we say we have, as a country, we're spending 1.5 trillion. We need a campaign to say the student who's doing standard 5, standard whatever levels of the grade person does, at varsity level, you will find a first-year student who doesn't understand the budget. You're sitting here today. If we have a debate about the budget, you probably don't know the budget, sitting here. Now, if you are to have a social activist, at least you have to have basic knowledge about those things. Make it your business to know what is the budget of the metro. Where does it go? And what is the impact of the expenditure that you have in the metro? What amount of the provincial budget comes to the area where you stay, in your village, etc.? What does it do? How is procurement happening, etc., etc.? That's the level of protection that you can get of democracy. When all of us are conscious, and you don't worry about whether the guys in government know these things or they don't, that I don't care. But at least I worry when you sit here and talk about change and talk about transformation, and you don't give yourself time to have the facts right, and we must do that. And our organizations before, when we used to go to negotiate education with apartheid rulers, we used to go in understanding how much they spend and what they're going to do. We need to know their building program, and we used to engage them on facts. Our organizations now have left that. They've left that to politicians, they've left that to bureaucrats, etc., etc. And that's why we have a crisis in this country. We must take back these issues, democracy, protect it ourselves. In order to protect it, we must ensure that we have knowledge about what government does. Every student must understand how the budget works. That's a powerful tool to begin with, at least. Your second powerful tool is understanding the rules that govern the expenditure in government. Because if we don't understand those things, we can sit here and talk until it's late. And actually, this thing of politicians throwing numbers at us, that's what was going to happen. People are going to come in here and say, no, don't worry. We're spending 20 billion on what is this, NEFSAS. We're spending so much on this, so much on this. And we become satisfied because we think, oh, that should be a lot of money. But we can't even use tools, basic tools, to unpack it and say, where does it go? What is the administration behind it? What are the procedures around it? Can we change the procedures to have better outcomes around it? We're building so much on schools. I was in the Eastern Cape. I was shocked at some point when I discovered we were spending, I don't know, is it 2 billion, I don't remember, and on math schools every year. And I was asking myself, but these math schools are not disappearing until we did a study of looking at what exactly, where the money goes. We discovered that the variation is between a classroom, 200,000 per classroom, and 3 million per classroom. So we have classrooms that are built for 200,000. You have other classrooms that are built for 3 million. Then what's the problem? So when we started getting into this thing, we realized that it's not even corruption, maybe you think it is. It was not even corruption. It was poor planning, poor design, and all of those things that you can put into this thing. So I'm saying that the big challenge for civil society in South Africa is that we have handed over power to government and political parties. And we're going to pay for it, I can assure you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tata, for your insight. I'm hoping that the energy is still alive in the room and that people are still willing to engage. We've still got 2 more speakers, and then we've got a panel discussion on the precariousness of well-being and how that structures then under and overdevelopment. All right. So I'd like to call on both the speakers that are going to be speaking next, Umasakhane Mlamla from Harambe and Usiabulela Zondane, NYDA, to come and join me here on the stage. And then we'll hear their presentations in the order that is on the program. If you could use the microphone and the laptop on the other side, gentlemen, that would be great. We can give them a round of applause as they come to the stage. While we're still getting orientated, okay? Sorted.
The problems of Duncan Village are like those of many other communities in Buffalo City. But by journeying to the library in the CBD, young people can now access the moving Goso Opportunity Hub. Sipokazi, Talisa, Elizabeth, Sipo, and Bulewa have all obtained work. I'm Scholars Solani, I'm 29 years of age. I'm working at Pick n Pay Gleason Park. When I got the job at Pick n Pay, I felt so excited. Hi, my name is Talisa Waluwalu. I work at Spa Highway. Having a job makes me feel independent and I'm so proud of myself. My name is Sipo Stella. Also known as Abigo. I'm 21 years of age. I work for Embassy Cruise Liners, housekeeping. When I got that job, oh my God, I was like, Hi, my name is Leila, and I'm 26 years old. I'm from Peterville. I found out about the public works program. Working with children, doing homework with them, we're doing soccer and dancing with children. All the money that I'm earning, it's helping me a lot because I'm supporting my family, even my child. My name is Elizabeth Whittington. I am running an ECD center in Duncan Village. I'm actually self-employed now, and By being self-employed, I can put bread on the table for my kids now. And the important part about creating these opportunities for young people is that it creates a real and imminent possibility for them. So basically, a young person has something to wake up for and wake up to.
The movie also Opportunity Hub aims to link young people to employment opportunities.
I assume they're here for the application
For the job, and I was wondering whether you could help me with that.
Okay, when I fill up your application form,
Do you have to pay anything or is it for free?
it's absolutely free, sir.
The Hub is an initiative that has come about through a collaboration between the National Department of Health with Buffalo City Municipality, the DG Murray Trust, and KMW. It is powered by Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. The Moving Also Opportunity Hub offers these services for young people, providing access to work seeker support.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you guys?
Reaching them into employment, and providing access to online learning opportunities to make themselves more employable.
It has been very important to create a space where young people are able to come and build on their creativity. Harambee has been around for the last 7 years, and over those 7 years, Harambee has played a very pivotal role in understanding the demand and supply side dynamics of South Africa.
I think it's a good thing for Harambee coming here in the library because it's helping us as young people to get jobs.
This is where I live. As you can see, I'm still busy building on, extending, because I actually need some more space so I can have enough space to work with my kids also.
Women like Elizabeth are just the start. Meaningful partnerships between social investors, government, and business are key in changing the current narrative of youth opportunities in Buffalo City.
So the first team, can you tell me what is your research topic? What will you be doing?
What is health and safety in the workplace?
And then you have to also tell me 2 facts. Hashtag did you know? Okay.
Over the next few years, the Moving Also Opportunity Hub aims to empower 60,000 young women on their journey to employment.
Oh, you may go ahead and clap. Good afternoon. So my name is Masa Lamla. I'm the provincial executive for Harambee in the Eastern Cape. So after that presentation from Mr. Jonas, I thought let me just play a video, just to show, to do 2 things really. To say, 1, there's a role that meaningful partnerships play in creating this wave that will drive young people from moving from education into income. But also secondly, to say, in order for that to happen, there's a lot of work that needs to happen in terms of building the right ecosystems that will actually drive this social impact that we need to talk about. And I'm going to try to do 2 things. So I prepared about 75 slides. I'm just going to go through maybe 3 of them in detail, and just to make sure that all of us can just get an understanding of the work that we do. But most importantly, kind of engage with the young people in the room to say, what are some of the things that you need to think about as a young person to build your own employability? So of course, Harambee has been around for the last 7 years, and having placed over 50,000 young people into income-generating opportunities with offices all across the country. And really, the foundation of our work is about how do we transition young people from education to income? And what are some of the pathways that we need to create for them in order for them to move from education to income? There's a reality that says that actually, I agree with what Mr. Jonas was presenting earlier on, that there's enough money on the system, right? About 32 billion rands get spent every single year on issues that are dealing with transitioning young people from education to income. whether it could be NSFAS, whether it could be money that is driven through the different SITAs that are actually around. But there's a lot of money on the system already that is meant to be spent on how do we move young people around and ensure that at the end of the day, they can generate some income. But also the reality that says that there's over 6 million young unemployed people right now. They're not in training, they're not in education, but also they're not in employment. So what is it that needs to happen in order to actually shift the dial? So through the last 7 years, Harambee has then been deciding on where should we focus our attention in driving change in the ecosystem. So as you can see, the type of people that we work with, largely 73% of them rely heavily on social grants. We know for a fact that it costs between 500 and 900 rands for a young person to look for work every single month. Now, if you're saying that young people are reliant on a system of social grants for survival, but also the reality that that money then gets spent on looking for work, that's 500 to 900 rands every month. 17% of them living in households where there's no formal income, but also 40% of them having kids of their own. So this is the profile of the young person that we actually deal with. There's over 1 million young people who have connected with the Harambee network. And out of the 1 million that have connected with us, we have managed to touch about 400,000 of them. We have done over 1 million individual assessments, which have actually given us a lot of data points to say, what is our understanding of what's available from the supply side? On the other side, our engagements with the private sector gives us insights to say what is available from the private sector side in terms of opportunities meeting supply side. But also there's another reality that we have that says, actually, only about 6% of young people that transition out of the schooling environment end up with a formal opportunity after a year. And about 8% of them transition into informal opportunities after a year. Now, there's a problem with that as well that says there's some fundamental issues that we need to address. And Harambee then is in the role that says, how do we ensure that we have an understanding of a supply side, understanding of the demand side, and try and create pathways that will bridge those two gaps. Clear that no one organization can solve youth unemployment. It's been clear from the beginning of the Harambee journey that says there's no one organization that has a monopoly on solving youth unemployment. What is required are meaningful partnerships between the public sector, the private sector, and the civil society to say, what is the role that we can all play in catalyzing opportunities for young people? And that is the work that we are doing, especially in the Eastern Cape. The video that you were seeing earlier on is just one example of how meaningful partnerships between private funders, the public sector, and a clearinghouse, which is in this context Harambee, can play a role in actually catalyzing 16,000 opportunities in the area of Buffalo City alone. Now, that model seems to be giving us the right results, but of course, there's a whole lot more work that still needs to happen in order to actually drive that agenda. What our position is about the fact that in order to help to solve this youth unemployment challenge, you need to be thinking about different pathways that you need to create for young people to actually transition into. And one of the pathways I think my colleagues here will be touching on is how to ensure that we move young people from this perception that they need to be job seekers and get them to start thinking about being job creators. But for those who are not in those spaces, how do we create additional pathways for them? So it's clear that the economy of South Africa as it stands is not creating enough opportunities. That is to absorb young people into the different spaces. Actually, Research is showing us that in a space of a year, there's between 250,000 to 500,000 opportunities in a year that the economy can create. But actually, how many of those opportunities will benefit young people? And those opportunities are very minimal, because even those opportunities that actually exist, they require some level of technical competencies, or they require some level of experience. Now, something needs to shift in terms of helping young people to think about how can they position themselves to gain those opportunities. That's in the formal sector. But also there's a lot of conversation right now about how the social economy can start being seen as a catalyst for creating new waves of employment. Now, we know for a fact that the cost of looking for work is quite high. At the very same time, the spatial challenges remain a factor and a deterrent to young people accessing opportunities, because the city centers are far removed from where, or rather the zones of opportunities are far removed from where young people actually reside. So actually to move from KwaZakele and go to town to drop a CV or to go to an internet cafe is quite costly. But now, how do we use the communities, or start thinking about communities as the next wave of creating opportunities within those spaces? But at the very same time, how do you create pathways where young people can start building on experience? Because employers are using experience as a proxy for employability. Also, how do we ensure that you create a space where young people can interact with a platform that will give them additional competencies? About 2 months ago, we invited students from one of the universities in the Eastern Cape. I'm not going to mention it. And we invited them to actually run through what we call an online blended learning content, which is basically Microsoft digital literacy. And it was puzzling and shocking at the very same time, where you see these graduates, they were about to graduate, who have no comprehension or basic understanding of functional computers, who have no digital literacy competencies. But of course, the private sector on the other side, and I think Prince, yesterday, Mr. Prince was talking about the fourth industrial revolution. So we need to do practical things right now that will help to position young people for those different type of opportunities, and to help shift the mindset about what young people see as opportunities. So we would love to also play a role in terms of engaging on the understanding of building this index that the municipality, sorry, the university is talking about. Because we've done quite a lot of work that seems to suggest that there's a number of things that the community needs to do, but also young people need to do in order to actually build on their employability. Functional competencies is quite key. Also work on behaviors that will make young people ready for work. Also do a lot of work in terms of socializing people to the world of work, but also having more conversation about how young people interact with the opportunities. So they need to have interest in the different zones of opportunities that actually exist. But also social demographics also affect where young people end up. But also you still have patriarchy on the other side as an influencer in terms of where young people land. So I'm from Pedi, Engusha, which is like three hours away from here. It was easy for me to move from Engusha and go to work in Johannesburg, but it was not the same for my sisters. And there's a problem with that, right? So there are some societal issues that we still need to deal with. But also at the very same time, in a space like where I'm from, Pedi, where you don't have any industry that is actually thriving, right? Then the geography of opportunity then becomes a very important conversation. That is, how do you ensure that within those spaces you can actually create spaces where young people can actually generate some income, but at the very same time, can we do some work that could migrate young people from those spaces to earn some income involved in some other spaces? So we've got a program that we're running with the Office of the Premier in the Eastern Cape, under Operation Pakisa, driven largely by SAMSA, where we recruit these young people from these different locations, but they end up working within cruise liners. So they have to travel, go to Mauritius, go to Mozambique, or go wherever. But we've taken out the geography of opportunity in that context. And there needs to be more conversations around how best that can be done. So key to driving this youth employment solution agenda is that there needs to be a conversation with the employers, which is about how to actually create advocacy for young people who are not in the networks. At the very same time, how can we help our government to think differently about where this money goes to? I think Mr. Jonas was very clear to say that there is money in the system, but how can we start informing the system to think differently about where money is actually going to? Because some of these programs that are already there, they are not leading to young people ending up in income-generating opportunities. But also, young people need to be involved in that conversation, right? That is, young people should not be spectators in these type of conversations. That is, young people need to take a stand and also make their voices heard to actually look at driving these social innovations. So this picture I just want to show is about the fact that with the right level of partnerships, you can create opportunities at scale. So what you have on my top right-hand corner is about a program that you're running in Joburg, which is a TSEPO 1 million program, right? Which is a conversion driven by BAPESA, which is in the BPO space, the call center type space. But also you have the provincial government, which is party to that conversation. But also you have Harambee, who is then playing a role in being a clearinghouse for those opportunities. What happened there was that the provincial government hosted investors from one of the countries, and the provincial government then said, this is what we can do in terms of providing you with incentives to invest in our space in Johannesburg. And this is what Harambee can do in terms of creating the pools that you will need for your business to thrive. So on the other side, you have a conversation that's taking place right now to say, how do we start changing the labor market? That is, how do we start changing how government spends money, but also how do we start changing how private sector spends money? Now, we are involved in a pilot that says, can we look at a model that will ensure that these organizations actually get paid for outcomes? That is, they're not paid for activity. There's a lot of money that is actually spent on the system right now for activity. But this activity is not leading into the desired outcome. How do we ensure that we find a way of re-engineering the process to ensure that these organizations that we engage with actually get paid for outcome? And the outcome in our universe would be young people in income-generating opportunities. So what we have also there is a story that we have on Bumbingomso. So if you think about East London, Buffalo City, you have a space where government is being seen as an employer. Actually, 34% of entry-level positions in Buffalo City are in the public sector space, whereas the national average is between 18 and 16%. Now, that's a problem on its own. At the very same time, you are in a space where the private sector is not creating enough opportunities. There's not even enough businesses who can hire young people in volumes. So you've got Johnson & Johnson, Mercedes-Benz, and Johnson Controls, but they cannot really hire young people in volumes. Even the opportunities that actually exist, they require some technical competency, or they require some certification. You're also in a space where matric, you've got a limited number of people who have actually completed matric. I think it's between 49% of the population of young people in Buffalo City who have completed matric. So even for the opportunities that exist, it becomes hard for young people to transition into them because the barriers that are there for inclusion. So we're in that space that says we need to find alternative innovations that will ensure that, one, we help to close the gap. That is, design some programs and activities that will help young people to close the competency gap. At the very same time, engage with the private sector and have a lot of advocacy conversations that are about, you need to relook your process of inclusion and relook your process of recruitment to ensure that you include the number of people who are part of your population. Even when you look at what the private sector is using in terms of, so whenever they're recruiting, they'll always be looking for people who've passed maths and science by 50% and above. But the reality that we have is actually less than 10% of the people that wrote matric last year in Buffalo City have passed maths and science by 50% and above. And it's the same for science. So if you are a private sector looking for such people, you're already fishing from a very small pond. And actually, you need to be thinking about how you need to be increasing that pool. But also in some of the conversations with the private sector, you get to understand that actually all they need is functional math competency. You just need to be able to add. You don't need to have the full package. The job requires you to be able to add, not necessarily to use very complex mathematical concepts. So that's the advocacy work that we have to do in order to just shift the labor market. So over the last 7 years, I mean, these are some of the examples of the partnerships that we have. And all of these partnerships are centered around creating an ecosystem that's about bringing social change to communities within South Africa, where we've identified that actually we need to have government as our friend because they hold a lot of resources, but we can have conversations around what we are learning from practically engaging with communities, and actually at the end start being a labor market change agent through informing or influencing some of the policy decisions that are made, but also start influencing some of the resource allocations that actually get to be made in South Africa. But also we've got a lot of social partners that partially fund the work that we do, and they're all interested in bringing about social change within the communities that we engage with. There's about 450 employers who have employed over 50,000 people across South Africa. The reality is that 50,000 versus 6 million unemployed young people, it's a drop in the ocean, right? But the 50,000 has given us enough insights that we feel like we can share with the rest of the world, but also that we can share with the rest of the provinces across South Africa. But also, the 50,000 placements have indicated to us that young people have what it takes to succeed, right? In our minds, it's clear that young people have what it takes to succeed, because none of these businesses that we've partnered with are partnering with us because they feel sorry. They're partnering with us because they have a business need, and we're able to find young people who are talented, who are helping to serve their business needs. But at the very same time, we're creating enough case studies that will then help to shape the labor market, as one of our key goals is being a labor market change agent. I've mentioned earlier on that there's about 1 million individual assessments that we've done. So there's a lot of organizations that are spending time to help us make sense of what that data actually means and how we can use that data to drive social change, but also to give information to other organizations that are doing similar work. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in that, but one slide that I just want to spend maybe about 2 minutes talking to is that what's required is to build a multi-sector work program to accelerate pathways from learning to earning. One, we need to be thinking about enabling inclusive growth through demand-focused human capital solutions at scale. So what I was mentioning earlier on is that there's a lot of organizations who are training people for the sake of training, right? There's a lot of institutions that have programs that are not aligned to what the market needs. And I think these are some of the frustrations that young people keep raising to us, that now that I'm a graduate, it appears that somebody said on the other table that the locks keep on changing. Now I've got this key, but as soon as I try and go open a door somewhere, it feels like the locks have been totally changed. One of the reasons is that there seems to be no alignment between what young people have access to in terms of knowledge and information versus what the industry is looking for. But also, some of the content that gets delivered is not really aligned to what the demand for skills is in South Africa. So there needs to be a conversation around how do we ensure that there's a linkage between the two. The second pillar in this multi-sector work program is about managing pathways to earning for youth not in training, education, or in employment. So I mentioned earlier on that we've placed about 50,000 young people into opportunities, but actually there's an additional number, I think about 10 to 15,000 young people who have attended some of our work seeker support interventions and managed to use that to find opportunities on their own. The reality is that young people are not a homogeneous group. Sometimes they just need information. So if you create hubs of information across the cities, hubs of information across the communities, then sometimes that's what young people need, right? Not to be handheld, but sometimes you just need to be thinking about ways of engaging them in concepts that will give them more information. The third pillar that's required in order to drive youth inclusion into the economy is thinking about how to use public and private investments and resources to actually accelerate these transitions. What I was saying earlier on is that there's money in the system, there's investments that already exist in the system, but there needs to be a deeper conversation around how to use those resources to drive inclusion. We're also playing a role, I think, in what the president announced a couple of months ago, the YES campaign, Youth Employment Services campaign, which actually has come out because of a number of conversations that have been taking place in the last 3 years around what are some of the key levers that will help to change or shift the dynamics in youth employment. And my last slide is about the fact that if I reflect on the journey that we've been on as Harambee, is that in the first year of our existence, that's 2011, we only had placed 40,000 young people into opportunities. And there was a significant upward movement from 2012 to 2014, where we placed 5,000 people. And as I stand here today, we've placed over 10% more. We're sitting on 50,000 right now. That 50,000 is not significant enough to drive social impact in our communities. And one of the key mandates that we have right now is to say, can we do 10 times more than what we've done? That is ensuring that by 2022, there's 500,000 young people who have transitioned into income-generating opportunities. Now, that's a very short period between now and 2022. And that is a task that we have at hand, because we're raising up our hands and saying, Tumamina, we are ready to be thinking about partnering with the right organizations who are also worried about ensuring that young people have a stake in the economy. For a young person who is in this room right now, you need to be thinking about a couple of things. One, the idea that you need to be thinking about how you can use your education, that is the information that we have right now, to continue building on your employability. Secondly, you need to be thinking about, in your community, in your universe, what spaces can you start playing a role in, whether it's volunteering, that is finding a space where you can start earning some work experience that will help you in actually moving forward. But also you need to be thinking about, in all of these conversations, what part can you play? So how much of this problem can you own as a young person? That is, not only blaming, but also how much of this problem can you own? That is, involving yourselves in conversations that are about empowerment, but also questioning the status quo, but at the very same time, thinking about how to continuously be a learning young person. Because it's clear that the universe that we live in, there's constant change. And you need to be making sure that you're all aligned with all of those things that are happening. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, I'm hoping everyone was listening attentively and has jotted down the questions that they would like to ask. I am aware, colleagues, that time is not on our side. But I do want to thank you again for investing in the time that you're giving us now in order for us to continue and complete the program, because I think it is important that we hear these particular presentations that are coming up. All right, over to you then, sir.
Dean of Students, student leadership and students at large, Mandis Bulsenelam. My name is Sabulela Zondani. I'm the branch manager of the NYDA PE branch at the Nelson Mandela Bay. Now today I'm just going to touch on, don't have many slides, but I'll touch on entrepreneurship as a form of employment and opportunities for young people. The actual problem statement itself sounds more like a question than anything else. And my answer to it is yes. there are plenty of opportunities for young people to enter into this fray. So I'll just touch on something I read up recently from the State of Entrepreneurship Survey in South Africa 2017, where they basically sampled 1,200 young people, most of which owned their own businesses and enterprises, 47% of which were closing the gap in that they were females who owned those enterprises. And it was quite interesting for me because most of the questions and myths were debunked from that study, and that's just one study. I love drawing from examples and business cases because that sort of brings context and brings it all back to home. What I found also is that the bad news for us, as a province, is that we're the lowest in terms of participation in this number. When it comes to young people owning their own enterprises and running them successfully, which is something we're trying, yet we have to sort of turn around and change. Another interesting find for me, which was not very, I don't think new to myself and many people in the room, was that 95% of these youth-owned enterprises were either funded by themselves as the owner of the business, family, or friends. Now, when we go out and we look for funding, these are all the questions that we sort of look into. Where do we source funding? Why is it that certain demographics are more successful in business than others? The answers lie there as well. And for us as South Africa, there's a historic significance that we need to look into when it comes to such findings. What I also thought to myself, and what speaks to what exactly I'm about to speak about or touch on in my presentation, was that most of those young people who were asked, how much do you need to start your own business? The majority said just 100,000 Rand. Now, this is very interesting for me because the NYDA provides exactly 100,000 Rand as the actual benchmark, or at least the ceiling, for youth-owned enterprises that we fund through our own fund as the NYDA. Now, the argument, or at least from my side and from the experience that I've had or gained, is that funding alone is not the silver bullet for youth-owned enterprises. If we're to try and break down what exactly entrepreneurship is, ultimately for me, at least in my own experience, is the mobilization of resources, converting all of that into either a product or a service that you can sell at a profit. That's basically it. It's just an economic vehicle that you can use. That's why all type of enterprises are viable for as long as you've got a market. That's why you'll find that Umama Otile from a Costin or from up at downtown has been selling fruit and veggies on that street or that corner for the past 25 years. The business model still works. It also speaks to a question that was raised at the back there about the unique opportunities and why we're funding barbershops, hair salons, all these other service industries. That's because, believe it or not, the business model is still relevant. That enterprise still has a market. Their costing is still competitive. So you face all of those questions, which you have to sort of debunk a lot of myths. And I liked the study because it sort of picked up on many of the challenges that we face and some questions that we need to also answer. And some of the questions, or at least 3 of them, that were raised by the young people in the study was that what challenges do we actually face as a youth-owned enterprise? And the 3 of them were finding clients or customers. So that's access to markets, number 1. Number 2, inability to raise funds. I touched on that a bit earlier. And then number 3, and for me most importantly, the lack of guidance. That speaks to social capital. For me, there are very few things that are more important than social capital as a young person trying to find either work or start your own business. It's proven. When you don't have an aunt or an uncle or someone you know who's either run a business successfully or still is running one, or is in a work opportunity, they actually work, and they can advise you to say, this is not how you go about looking for work. This is not how you go about starting and running a successful business. If you don't have that hand-holding approach, you are bound to fail. Or you're bound to make mistakes before you actually start to pick up and actually make a success of what you're trying to achieve. So for me, strangely enough, looking for work and starting your own business aren't very different. It's just 2 different ways of making a living. On both ends, you have to pitch. At an interview, you have to answer questions as to why am I the best candidate? At the level of looking for an investment for your business, you have to answer questions as to what's my value proposition? Same coin, different sides. So if you can't sell, which is another big issue that we have with the young people that we serve, because I'll also point out in the presentation about that. If you really can't sell either yourself or the product that you're trying to get out into the market, someone's going to beat you to it. I've seen it when it comes to the actual trainings that we do. Just a round of introductions and people's heads are down. And I'm like, but Sia, how am I supposed to buy that bottle of water from you if you can't look me in the eye and convince me that that is the best bottle of water on the market? It's problematic. So there's a lot that we need to sort of look into that also speaks to what Tatu Jonas mentioned about our education system, about how we need to really get behind our communities in the rural areas, the black poor communities. We need to get out there as young professionals, get out there, take up a young person, mentor that young person. I'm involved in my own capacity in many mentorship initiatives. I am still, I'm an alma mater, I'm an alumni of the university. My skills were honed here. I graduated in just 2012. And my own life story sort of speaks volumes, because I honed many of the skills that I have right here. I was involved in some of the mentorship programs we had here in psychology, because black psychologists basically didn't understand what psychology is, because it was adopted from a Western context. So how do you take this Western paradigm and bring it into context with a largely black population in South Africa and say, this is how you can heal your mental illness? So we came together, like Upu Jonas mentioned, that, and we actually mobilized one another to say, what is the psychology? And how can we as black professionals service our communities with this discipline? So that's just one of many examples to say, young people need to sort of organize themselves. We need to do that. You have to be part of something. You can't just sit on your own corner. It doesn't work like that. Even in my own experience, it never worked. Going at it alone did not work. Be part of something, get involved. It doesn't have to be politics, but provide a meaningful contribution to your community in your own corner and start there, and you'll find value. So I keep hammering on about coaching and mentorship. It is very important. I'll run through a few slides and really point out some of the success stories, so to speak. I can't say it's a really success story because many of them were captured in the last financial year. They've been in operation, at least the businesses that we've funded over the past 12 months. And what I've also found, Masa, I think you find this very interesting. On our books, there's a very positive correlation between young people who are employed and successful business owners. So young people who decided to take the leap and say, I'm going to leave work and start their own businesses, have a higher likelihood, according to us, to make a success of it. For many reasons, I suppose. But it's something to really think about. And that's why I think I always enjoy the synergy we have as two organizations, because the clients I serve are exactly the same as those that the Harambee serves as well. So in a nutshell, the NYDA, who we are, what we do, and that's where we basically take our mandate from, or our marching orders. It's from the NYD Act 54 of 2008, and then our nitty-gritties come from the National Youth Policy 2015 to 2020. A lot of discussions have gone around about the NYP 2020, and I'm hoping questions are going to arise, at least directed at me at an operational level, about how we go about actually implementing that policy. Okay. Sorry, just a bit of a heads up. How the NYDA was formed, it was an amalgamation between two entities. Msobomvu, the National Youth Commission, they came together and they formed what is now known as the NYDA, way back in 2009. Our vision, very short, very to the point, is basically to improve the socio-economic conditions of young people. That's basically it, all young people. There is, I must admit, a bias towards young people in rural and peri-urban areas for obvious reasons, access. And so we've got programs directed to them as well. Okay. Our key performance areas. So this is what we get measured on a year-to-year basis. Number one, our flagship program under the Integrated Youth Development Strategy, which is about to be approved. We should or we must have an annual priority program. So right now it's the economic participation, what we call entrepreneurship development. So you'll see us using that as a flagship program to say, this is what we should be doing for at least this financial year, and try to get young people to start up their own businesses, employ themselves as a first employee, because that's what you become as an entrepreneur, right? And then once you start growing, you can actually go on and absorb more employees if the need arises. Don't take on employees if you don't need them. Your business will sink. Education and skills development. That was our APEX program in 2014 until 2016 when we handed over our matric rewrite program. So in a nutshell, what the NYDA does, we conduct research, we collect information. We then pilot a program based on the research that we've conducted to say, for instance, there are a lot of young people who don't pass their matric, or at least adequately, for entry into university or institutions of higher learning. I think we can all agree on that. So back in 2011, we came up with a program to say, let's give young people a second chance. The Second Chance Matric Rewrite Program, where we gathered retired teachers and experts in the field to tutor young people every Saturday for an entire year until they write their exams at the end of the year. That worked out brilliantly. Within the 4th year of that program, the Department of Basic Education put up their hand and said, give it to us, we're the custodians. And so that in a nutshell sort of gives you an idea of what exactly it is we do. So it's no longer on our books, and it's no longer a priority program because we've been able to hand that program over, and then from the advent of free education, NSFAS has collaborated with us, where they come from the Cape Town office, which is the only office they have. They come to our branches. We're going to be rolling it out this year as well. We did it last year, where we take on 2 representatives and we process the actual application form on behalf of those young people at particular branches. 16 branches all across the country, 2 representatives in each. It gives us ease of access to our young people, and it prevents a young person submitting an application form to NSFAS only to find out the following year that there were a few documents missing, and now you are out of the time lapse. The time has lapsed. You can no longer apply again. So to mitigate those issues, we've taken on that as to say we may have moved ourselves away from education, but we're still part and parcel, or at least we still play in the sector. Social cohesion and nation building, we do that through what we call our National Youth Service Program, where we take volunteer young people to volunteer in nation building programs and social cohesion. Background and purpose of our EDP, our flagship program. Ultimately, we provide a training free of charge, where we actually provide, we impart skills on what are the fundamentals of starting and running a successful business. We do this to stimulate the appetite for entrepreneurship and sustainable livelihoods. So I think sometimes when we look at, and I'll mention a few figures when it comes to our budget. When it comes to some of the ideas that were mentioned in the back, the more unique ideas, the bigger ideas, the more innovative ones, the budget limitations sometimes sort of undermine what we can do in that space. So ultimately, our apex priority is to create jobs and also encourage sustainable livelihoods. That's why you'll find us in all 7 local municipalities. I think it's my next slide, where we actually operate and we try and assist young people to meaningfully participate in our economy. Okay, so our qualifying criteria is quite simple. A young person operate within the borders of South Africa. You must possess a green South African ID, and your turnover must be no more than 350,000 rand. This is why I always say that the children of, or at least those who qualify for NSFAS funding, are our clients. Because for NSFAS, if you come from a home of no more than 350,000 rand turnover per annum, you qualify. With us, if your turnover is no more than 250K per annum, you qualify. So we actually target those young people. Our grant program is no less than 1,000 rand and no more than 250,000 rand. We've increased it from 200,000. Primarily because young people are coming to us with great ideas such as app development, agro processing. They're working with drones to sort of to improve the way we work with our agriculture, and so we need to sort of put more emphasis and back them with more funding in that area. We operate, or at least we fund and support those who are in both the informal and formal sectors. So if you have a business and it's not registered, it's not a problem. You can come to us. We can have a conversation. Let's find out if it's viable. Let's find out if your costing is reasonable. Because the question always is, especially in the more rural areas, you may have a brilliant product, you may cost it, but can your market actually afford it? So we have to have those discussions first. And sometimes young people become agitated by such discussions because they take a long time. But ultimately, we're trying to really assist one another in that sense. Our business management training, which we call the BMT, is in threefold, if I can call it that. So you come to us and you have a business idea. We're going to refer you to the Generate Your Business modular training, which is 3 days. If you come to us with an operational business idea, which is a question I field quite a lot, where people say, no, but you guys only fund operational businesses. For good reason. There's a track record. You can actually show us that you've started something with the resources, no matter how much limited they are, but you use the resources that you have at your disposal. You started something, you don't have a balance sheet, you just took an invoice book and you started writing, imali ngenayo, nemali ephumayo. That's all we need. You cannot be registered. In fact, sometimes I think to myself, sometimes we're better off supporting the elder, because the elderly come to us with better documentation sometimes than young people. And it's very discouraging. An elderly lady will come and say, look, I've been running a fruit and veg shop on the side of the street. This is my ledger. This is the money that I'm getting in. These are my expenses. These are my costs for the business. And this is the stipend that I draw for myself. And we use those as case studies for young people, so that we can expose one another to this information and how these small informal enterprises are actually making a success of it. Okay? And if you are at a higher level, at least pitching at a higher level of your business, if you've been operating for more than about 6 months to a year, we refer you to the Improve Your Business. And then the additional support will also follow from there. So non-financial support is our voucher program, where we link you with a service provider who will provide you with a market voucher, a business plan, etc. But for the details, you can actually just give me a ring or actually come to the office and we can actually talk more about that. I don't want to bore you with the nitty-gritties. So that's our voucher program ultimately. It goes on to support the actual grant program. So ideally, if you benefit from the grant, you ideally also benefit from the voucher. Again, mentorship is one of our flagship programs, so we link young people with mentors in the specific sector that they operate in. We also link them with markets. I'll give you an example. Out in Creddock, there's a bakery that we just funded last year, Soft Touch Bakery in Creddock, Lingelitla Township. The young man has been running for about a year now. He came to us and said, look, I want to get my products onto the shelves of Spar, the local Spar there. I just don't have the confidence to approach them. So we approached Spar on his behalf. And we were able to get an agreement that his muffins will be there and he'll be able to sell them from Spar. So that just forms a very small example of what we mean by market linkages. And so those are our voucher offerings, an updated version of them at least. The last three are recent additions. Digital voucher, which is basically your social media. We get a social media expert to come in and show you how to run a social media platform. All three of them, or the popular ones: Instagram, Twitter, and your bloggings. All right. Also WhatsApp as well. So we can't actually move away from that. SABS vouchers. Those are more applicable to the more industrial and mining towns. Your Rustenburg, Mpumalanga, Witbank. Young people come to us and say, "Look, I want to be a subcontractor, but I don't have the safety packages. What do I do?" We link that young person with a service provider who can provide them with that service or that product. OHS vouchers, similar package there as well. These are our thresholds. Threshold 1 to 4. And then the type of businesses that we fund under each threshold. So the 1,000 to 10,000 rand are basically your idea generation and your startups, right? Threshold 2, startups and cooperatives. Cooperative, 5 members or plus. You got one idea, you got a constitution, you start a business, you come together for one objective, you can get yourself 50,000 rand, depending on the operational needs of the business. Okay? Growth stage, 50 to 100,000 rand. Now these are the funds that Jonas was talking about. Even though they're limited, they are there for those who are serious about getting into business. And then expansion stage, which is our new threshold, up to 250,000 rand for those who are involved in agro processing. I'm about to finish to wrap up. Utilization of our grants, those are our bullet points. If you're not going to use it for that, unfortunately, we cannot support you. It's to purchase immovable assets, contract finance, which is a new one for us, shop renovations. If you've got a shop and you've got a lease, we even assist young people to get leases from their local councillors. Working capital paid directly to the grantee, surety and guarantee, as well as co-funding. So this is the space that we work in to stimulate the appetite for entrepreneurship in young people. And then one of my favorite slides, this is our operational area as the PE office. So sometimes a young person comes to us in September, October, November, and the funds are depleted. This is why. This is where we operate. We have no less than five PTYs and 2 cooperatives in each of those 7 local municipalities that we fund. Our budget is something close to 3 million rand. Now that's a very small amount for that entire region right there to stimulate youth-owned enterprises. But the joy that we get when we actually assist young people in those areas, we get there and they're ready. Many of them are already running. Some of them come to me and say, yeah, if you didn't come to us, I was going to run anyway. Because I have no choice. I must make a living. I must put food on the table. And they outcompete some of our young people in the metros. I must admit to it. The resilience of those young people is amazing. So we service the metro, the Sundays River Valley. We've got an office that we're going to be setting up there, just to expand our reach. And so, just a quick model of how we do it. We'll send 2 officers, let's say to Redbron. Let's make it as far out as possible. 2 officers to basically mobilize and create an awareness for the youth in Redbron. They'll come back. They'll spend maybe 2 days there. They'll come back and then they'll come back with a referral letter to say, guys, these are how many young people we actually need to get trained on life skills, job readiness training, or EDP. And then 1 trainer or 2, depending on the number, will go to Redbron the following week, provide a 5-day training. On the 4th day, or on the 3rd day, in fact, one of our business development officers will go to the same venue and look for young people who are ready to submit the applications. So that we don't have young people who are sitting in Redbron ready with ready applications having to come to PE and submit them. Or submit them with missing documentation that they need to go back all the way back to Redbron and collect and then come all the way back to PE and submit. So our BDO goes there, spends 2 days with that very group, collects all those who are ready to submit the application, comes back to the branch, and the branch will review, we approve, we decline, or refer back. And that's it. So that is our model, in short, of how we assist young people in our area of Sarah Bartman district. A few success stories, if I can call them that, or young people that we've managed to fund. Siposetu Jam from Woma Township. He had a fast food outlet, or has one. We got him a container, as well as some stock and equipment worth the amount of 50,000 rand. He employs about 3 young ladies who actually work with him, and is one of the first guys to actually get grant funding in the area. So we decided to have a nice little launch for him. We also launched Siyakola Silengile, all the way out in Boyston's Park. He basically fixes the tires of taxis and other cars. And then as a side hustle, if I can call it that, or an additional income revenue, he does a car wash. So you get your car there and you got something wrong with the tire, you can get it washed and the tire fixed. Okay, he's still operational. I just drove past him the other day. All he wanted was 10,000 rand. He was a going concern. He said, yeah, this is it. I've got nothing else. So whether you fund me or not, it really doesn't matter. I'm going to run. And he said, all I need is 10,000 rand. He managed from the 10,000 rand to hire 3 people. So there are knock-on effects, small progress, but when we're able to sell these business cases, I really think we can make a difference. MZK Holdings, which I think is the next food lovers market, they're out in Bethelsdorp, Bloemendal. They cycled every single day to our branch for training. 5 days straight. They got about 10,000 rand, that's it. Just for a few bags of potatoes and just to get them going. Because cash flow always is a problem for youth-owned enterprise, or any enterprise, in fact, be it medium, small, or large. cash flow always is a problem. So they just needed a bit of a hand up with when it comes to stock, and now they're doing great in the area. And what we do by these launches is that we encourage other young people to say, if he can do it, so can you, number one. Number two, we get buy-in from the community as well. Because if the local councillor doesn't know that there's a business running in his own backyard, it becomes a problem when things start going wrong. So that local councillor was on the far left-hand corner of the top picture there. Actually, we engaged him and said, here is a business in your ward, please make sure you support it. Amanda Dinge, the only supplier of hair fiber, or the only distributor of hair fiber in Somerset East, got about 50,000 rand. So she's got a salon and a hair fiber shop all in one. We're able to provide her with EDP training, mentorship, as well as market linkages. So it's small steps, but you sort of get the rhythm that people are doing well in their own spaces. The first black-owned business in Thornhill, which is the Kocha municipality, 2 young guys decided to just get up and say, look, why don't you just start a printing business? And when they sat down with me, they said, Sia, we're not only going to do this printing business. Our aim from the money we're going to make from this is to come up with, is to start a business where we actually produce nappies, sanitary towels, and toilet paper. The business proposal is with me. They shared it with me. They're already approaching, from this business model, they're already approaching other FDIs for funding. So they came to me with a vision that far surpasses what they actually got funding for. They just said, this is just a vehicle for us to get where we want to go. So it just says a lot about vision. 2 young guys who decided to get up and do something about their lives. That's where you can find us. And yeah, I just wanted to really bring it close to home. I think a lot of discussions have been happening at a more higher level. Just to bring a few cases to us that we can actually start grappling with and start working from. And even start supporting if we can. Thank you very much.
Huge thank you to both speakers. We do have thank you gifts for you. So please, if you don't leave the stage. I'm sure everyone has an appetite to engage these particular issues, especially because when we're discussing issues of employability and income, we're discussing, the livelihood of young people. So I'm sure all the bright young minds in the room want to engage, but unfortunately, I will have to manage your engagement. And I'm going to only ask for 2 questions, each of them posed to one of the speakers, please. All right, so we'll take one. Lumcham, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to, can the House just allow me to sit? I think mine is rather a comment. Oh, hi, my name is Noxie. I forgot. For the NYDA, and I think I like the relationship that you started with the NSFAS and on. And I think it's going to be very important that you create a relationship that actually speaks to your beneficiaries as well. And this will be assisting with skills and educational development, that those that are your beneficiaries also be encouraged to go to school so that they're able to create a better environment within their business. With that said, I think I just find one problematic scenario with NYDA, and this is in relation with the case studies that you always make of an old woman who's selling fruit and veg at the store. Many of the times your assistance or financial assistance is just to maintain that store environment, but is not necessarily encouraging for them to be or go bigger, in the sense that they move, and I get that that's viable and that's an existing market, but I also think that you need to create some sort of a system to dream bigger than that, to be the ones that actually supply the fruit and veg and grow their business into something more bigger. And in regard to Harambee, I think, and what you guys were saying, it's true, that it's going to be very important that you also create an interrelationship between Harambee, NYDA, and even what is this movement, the higher graduate, to get your database from higher graduate, and for NYDA to look for beneficiaries within Harambe as well, for those that have graduated in entrepreneurial qualifications. But I think my only problem with Harambe, I think it has an age restriction, something till 35 or, I'm not sure, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. The graduates are not within just that age group. And we're forever encouraging people to go to school at any different age. So, and I think that the government needs to assist in creating a bigger market for you to actually take your database into. I'm not necessarily happy about someone being happy about working at SPA, you know? So, and then that's just for something that government should do. There should be greater and bigger opportunities that open up for everyone. But more than anything, I think big up, guys. You guys are doing well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that input. Please, if you do have a question, that would be much better. Thanks so much. We'll find a way to get a mic to you.
I know that I'm being targeted, but but I'll keep it brief. Let me first start with the Harambe. My name is still Sandy Limjam. I personally am of the strong view that we need to stop this model of building CVs to go and work. Because as much as we have these minimal success stories, people with masters in civil engineering are still sitting in the streets with placards. I would much rather suggest on leaning more to where Uputi Zondani is at. Firstly, let me say that working with him is a breath of fresh air at NYTA. I'm also a fortunate person who's once experienced NYTA's grant program. I had a big problem with the service provider who produced very mediocre work. And I once challenged him over the phone with something that I wanted. I wanted to see the response. And he gave me the response I was hoping for. Nonetheless, we work on trying to build student entrepreneurship here at the university. And currently, there is a new initiative from higher education called Entrepreneurial Development in Higher Education. It's funded by the university's capacity building program. It's currently allocated 40 million, which is not really much for 26 universities, to start the process of discussing student entrepreneurship. This is obviously coming and emanating from the huge unemployment rate of graduates. Now, the first thing I would like to challenge from also Harambe, would it be possible to form a student entrepreneurs capacity development program? Not only at Nelson Mandela University, but we look at it because you operate provincial. You form a program dedicated strictly to students, entrepreneurs who have existing or aspiring businesses. Basically reconfiguring what both of you are doing and amalgamating resources, because Uput Zondani doesn't have enough. 3 million is nothing when you are coordinating a province. It's a budget of the SRC actually. So you need to be also, we always have to be cognizant, and we know the issue of NYTA national, because most of the money goes to paying staff anyway. So it's a much higher level. So I would like to ask, would it be possible to start working on a student entrepreneurs capacity development program? Because I believe Enectas has student entrepreneurs currently operating on campus. There are barbers, student cuts my hair, we want to start buying groceries and food from students, but we need these services you provide here on our campuses so that we can start seeing this ecosystem. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Before I allow the speakers then to respond and then have their closing remarks, I would like to ask that the panel for the following discussion on the precariousness of well-being and its impact on overcoming underdevelopment/development to start organizing themselves for the following session.
Sorry, colleagues, we're just trying to integrate with this thing of technology.
Let me thank you very much and welcome the questions, comments as well. Speaking to growth, very important, I must admit and agree with you. When it comes to how we implement our program, ultimately, we'd like our young people to start, get the business off the ground, and then we go about getting the growth into fruition. And when it comes to the actual growth of business, it's where we actually link young people with mentors. Be that as is may, the actual volunteer mentors, but we link them with mentors in the area, who will then come back to us with a report back to say, Sia, I've done a health check on this business, and this is what it needs to actually grow. So efforts to that in that regard are there. A growth, once again, when it comes to market linkages, as small as the effort may be, where we were able to link a youth-owned cooperative out in Creddock with a local spa to say, we need the products of this young person on your shelves because you've got traffic. We need the profits to come in for these young people. That product must be bought. Those are our efforts at advocacy and lobbying for young people who are beneficiaries of our programs, over and above just giving them funding. So I think definitely efforts are in progress to speak to the growth and expansion of our businesses. Student entrepreneurship and capacity building, 100% Mjamba, I'm always available. You know that very well. And I think I'd love to extend that to yourself too, Marcel. Let's get involved with students. Let's work with them. I've had a few exchanges with them. We've worked quite well together. So it's definitely a work in progress. And the ideas that come from them, in as much as we may be bogged down in our own administrative processes, etc., the ideas that come from them, ultimately Mjamba becomes an ambassador and an extension of the work that I do. So ultimately I enjoy working with them because it fits into exactly what we do. And when we can speak the same language around the same table, then I think we're on the right path.
Sure, fully agree, Sia. So the beauty is that we already work together quite closely. So trying to think about referral points for young people, and I think this is a very important fact that says that actually we need to be creating these information portals where young people are able to get information about different offerings that actually exist within the different communities. And I think that is what we're trying to do here with Sia, to say, if you come to Arambi, but you've got aspirations for, then we can link you up to. If you come to NYDA, you've got aspirations for, then they can connect you to Arambi. So maybe to answer some questions around age and opportunity, and maybe the one about CV as well. So if I think about our work, we call ourselves a labor market change agent, which is largely about thinking about how do we transform society, how do we transform how business is currently operating, how do we ensure that we start influencing labor practices and human capital solutions all across the country. And a large portion of our work is driven by the private sector, right? So it's largely the people that hire, that actually make the hiring decisions, who actually influence some of the work that we do. And a large portion of then our focus becomes on advocacy. That is, you need to be thinking about those people who are falling outside of the thresholds that the different barriers actually have. So age is one of the barriers that sometimes employers have. So largely tell us that we need people who are between this age group and that age group. And our work as Harambee is to say, actually, you actually need to be thinking about these different types of people as well. And also, CV is the culture of the private sector, right? So part of the work that we do is about advocacy to say why these things need to shift. There was a young person I met 2 weeks ago who said to me that, listen, myself, for the last month, I submitted over 50 CVs, but I have not received even one single response. And imagine how much money that has cost me to actually print those CVs out. So there's a lot of advocacy work. That's the point I'm trying to say that there's a lot of advocacy work that we need to do with the private sector to say how do you start engaging differently with these opportunities. But at the very same time, how do we start using the public sector facilities that are actually available to drive and close some of these gaps? Because in some instances, in some municipalities, you have free Wi-Fi hotspots, but sometimes they don't have data. So they're not working. But also the youth advisory centers that are meant to be all across the province and in the metros, they're not servicing that need. To say, providing access for resourcing young people. And the last point that I just want to make is around the fact that all of this work is tough work because there's a lot of dependencies to it. That is, the economy has a role to play in catalyzing opportunities. At the very same time, the metro has a role to play in attracting investors who will then in turn create new zones of opportunities. But at the very same time, academics and academia has a role to play in ensuring that the skills that young people leave our universities with are actually aligned to what the market is looking for. At the very same time, young people actually have a role to play as well in saying, how can I better position myself to have access to these different zones of opportunities? And what's my attitude to what opportunity looks like? I would argue with the lady that commented around opportunity. I'll say it is very important for young people to understand that the journey to where they want to end up will sometimes begin at that spa or that Pick and Pay, or even as a cleaner. Because that is then what private sector will see as signals for employability. So that young person who works as a cleaner can use that as a differentiating factor whenever they're actually engaging or selling themselves in front of an employer. So all of these things are then helpful in building young people's employability. And I don't think we should downplay it.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. We just have a small token of our appreciation for sharing then with us the insights that you've given us. I know that quite a lot of the minds in the room are going to be taking away with them certain points that you've mentioned, particularly around how they can position themselves as better, as more employable, and also how they can then increase their livelihood as well. Thank you so much, though, for your time. I'm hoping that the energy is still in the room and that even though we still have a few bodies missing, that people are still feeling excited and energetic about the last session that we're about to have. I would like to offer everyone a 2-minute stretch break. I know that there was a lot of listening that's happened since since 2 o'clock. So please feel free to get some coffee and come back. We're just going to organize the panel for the next session. Please, 5 minutes and we'll be back ready to start. All right, colleagues, if I can start calling up my panel that are going to be in conversation with myself, discussing then the precariousness of well-being and its impact on overcoming development and underdevelopment as such. The main issues that the panel is going to be touching on, and especially because we've just spoken about employability, the panel is going to be trying to then frame this idea of unequalness, inequality. I think we've already alluded to patriarchy as well, but in general, then the state of well-being, particularly related to women and how that affects full participation in development, full participation in democracy, and being able as well to then enjoy the freedoms that development and economic development as such are supposed to then bring. So on the panel with us, and I'm just going to begin, and we'll allow everyone to move in as they finish just collecting their coffee. On the panel, to my far left, we've got Unom Tamenye, who's then a master's student here at Nelson Mandela University, and she's part of the Gender Research Committee at CANRAD here at the university. My immediate left, I've got Nangamso Nxumalo, who's a social commentator and a student activist at Nelson Mandela University. On my right, we are welcoming actually back a panelist from this morning, Umamu Usisusiziwe Jongizulu, who's from the UN Fund for Population Activities. And then on my far right, we've got Umahali Yashiane, who's the Nelson Mandela University SRC 2018 current serving Secretary General. A round of applause for the panel. Thank you. All right, so we've heard quite a lot about employability, and we've heard a lot about employment this afternoon, in this session particularly. And I think it's important that we don't miss the fact that the idea of employment and how we integrate individuals and the youth into development is not the same, especially if we paint the youth or young people with one brush. There's a gendered citizenship or gendered aspect that I think it's important that we point towards, and it's been mentioned throughout the day, but we've dealt with it almost in a by-the-way fashion, and perhaps this is the opportunity to highlight some of the issues that we as women might be facing that hinder then full participation in democracy, in development, seeking employment options, and so on. So I suppose in discussing then the issue of well-being and how that influences your development as a young woman, can I ask then, are you able to define yourself and your well-being, your state of happiness, your state of health almost, outside of your gender? Nomta?
Is it evening or afternoon? Afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. As Nobela just said, my name is Nomta. When I read the question initially, which is the precariousness of well-being and its impact on overcoming underdevelopment or development, I had to firstly research what precariousness means. Such a long word. And the question resonates with me, and I think resonates with every other woman out there, because the uncertainty of being well with women is a day-to-day reality with South African women. It is a reality that is perpetuated through gender. And in my research, being in the research committee of the university, questions of what is the role of the institution in executing gender pedagogy and gender communication through students are the people that are in charge of gender transformation through transformation of language, transformed bodies themselves before transforming the knowledge to their constituents or to their students. Because that on its own plays a role as to the product that they are building. It plays a role as to how those people act when they infiltrate spaces of leadership, when they infiltrate spaces that were not particularly made with them in mind. Those spaces, it creates a lost generation of students or even bodies that are comfortable with being represented at gender quotas, that are comfortable with being gatekeepers of patriarchy. So in trying to move away from gender, in trying to transform, are we transforming the academics that are teaching gender? That is the main question. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for that insight, Nomta. I think you're pointing to quite important points there, especially when you're trying to structure then spaces of higher learning and how they are supposed to be part and parcel of changing the communities that they find themselves in. I suppose my question then to Usisiziwe would be, how do we take action then from looking at what Unomta has said about universities themselves? What is the role of a university then in serving the communities in which it finds itself? And how do we form then a more communal way that includes both university students and the community in finding strategies to counter then gender inequality?
Thank you so much. I think I just want to, in response to your question, I just want to paint a picture of a young person that comes into a university and is independent for the first time, is given a room in the residence or wherever they are residing. And there's these wide, lots of opportunities that are open for them that are normally wouldn't be there, because you know how we monitor as older people, we want to know what you're doing this time. And we know of a lot of things that happen within our university spaces. We know of sex formats that has been written, we've read about that in some of our institutions of higher learning. We've had instances of young people being sexually violated within the space where they're supposed to be protected within the universities. These are challenges that are there in our communities. I mean, sexual violence is a reality, and I know that we all know that for HIV, we normally say that GBV, in particular, sexual violence, is one of the key structural drivers for HIV. And the young people that are within our universities, they are a sample of the people that are there in our communities. So the challenges that you would find in an institution of higher learning, for example, is the challenge that is there in the community from where those young people are coming from. I just want to just a bit give you a snapshot in terms of the gender inequality index that South Africa ranks 90 out of 148 countries. And we know that there's certain factors that fuel violence that have been written about. We have seen some stats where they're saying that 45% of women and girls, they experience violence, especially sexual violence, and some of it is underreported. We know that people don't want to go to the police to report. They would rather shy there, especially young people. But also the risk factors that are associated with this. I mean, I've spoken about HIV, and some of it is like harmful practices that young girls, they've been exposed to. You find them being married young, and sometimes people get shocked and they think we are saying South Africa is upper middle income. But some girls your age, some of them have children, they are married, you know, they would rather be in a gathering like this, discussing something more progressive. But some of them are married, and we say it's harmful practices that are there for our young girls. We know that there's also norms that undermine gender equality. Those are the things that make us not to achieve gender equality at an individual level, but also at a societal level. There are these norms that we accept. This is the way that people are supposed to behave. A boy is not supposed to cry, and a girl is not supposed to do this. These are some of the things that we cushion in the society, and we think is the way that we're supposed to act. I think we've also spoken in the morning about patriarchy, a lot about patriarchy, and we know that this is still there in our communities. And we really want young people to champion programs, to champion advocacy that's against such things in our communities. We know about the unequal power dynamics. Sometimes they make young women and girls not to be able to negotiate the use of condoms, for example. And I think as sample of young people within the university, it is your space where you are able to influence other young people for gender equality in our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sisiziwe. I think you've given us food for thought, especially when you're structuring then the reasons why or the determinants of why women within university settings aren't well, because of the fact that university systems are also dragging with it the issues that are part of the community. I think a question that I would like to ask our Secretary General, Umahalia, then is, in your experience with dealing with students at the university, what are some of the issues that the SRCs are finding, or you as a student leader are finding, that are in essence not making women students safe or well in this university?
Thank you very much, Nobu. As I've been introduced, I am Mahalia Shiani, the Secretary General of the SRC. Leading students and being in the space that I find myself in, I find that students, particularly females, it's hard for them to express their feelings or what they go through as students, right? I'll just touch on, for example, sexual harassment and suicide, and which is, you know, suicide now, the rate is going very high, and with also sexual harassment. And most of us come from poor Black families where it is very hard to open up, and it's not to be okay, ne, for coming from a Black family is just a minor issue, you know. So students must use facilities such as student counseling at all times, and know that it's okay not to be okay, and speak up, you know, because you find that when you're dealing with a student, you have to go deeper and deeper to find the core issue, you know, because they find it very hard to express themselves. And it's being the sensitive person that I am, sometimes it's very difficult also to deal with such issues. And as a student leader, I must also find it within my space to also go and find myself and actually make sure that mentally I'm also prepared to help such students, you know. So yes, I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much, Maile. You pointed to quite a lot that we would have wanted to be able to discuss here, you know, just on the idea of how pervasive it is to have students within a university setting that are still influenced by the same thoughts that they were socialized under, where as a man, almost as you've said, well, I suppose young boys, men, within a university setting, and how they're not supposed to then feel, in essence. And I think Umahali has spoken well into the different avenues that are available for them at the university to use. Thank you for that. I think another question that we might want to ask then to yourself, Nangam, so to bring you into the conversation, is what has been the role then of social justice movements? Not necessarily within the university, but in general. If we look at the fact that tomorrow, 1st of August, is going to be the total shutdown, the nationwide call for the end of femicide in South Africa. What has been the role then of social justice movements in answering then and overcoming issues of underdevelopment or even economic inclusion of women, as it were?
Good afternoon. My name is now as introduced. The role of social justice movements. I think the most impactful one that I can actually name, because it's something that sparked many different things in not only for students, but also for the country as a whole, the nation, the world even, was during Fees Must Fall. There was a recognition of the fact that there is a precarity of our being that in university institutions, not only university institutions, but generally there is a lack of recognition of the poor, of black females, in particularly black women. Let me actually not say females, women, because there is something attached to calling women females and, to black women. Now, social justice movements have assisted us in, or rather have awakened within us, this need to hold institutions of high learning, people, and like various people that exist in the world, or rather in our societies, accountable for whatever it is that we see is a problem. Particularly now, our bodies are under fire because of femicide, gender-based violence. And so social justice movements have assisted in giving people the power, or rather the confidence, to be able to reclaim themselves and to assert themselves in spaces where they have never been recognized before. And I think social justice movements assist a lot in just doing that, because we're looking to assert ourselves, not necessarily to ask for permission to exist, but to assert the fact that we are here, we are human, and we exist, and you must recognize us for who and what we are. Whether we are queer, whether we are black, whether we are women. We exist, and you need to give us a space to exist. And we will not negotiate that. This is a negotiation, it's an assertion of ourselves. And, it's just given us that confidence to be able to do that, to speak our minds. Even my speaking my mind has come from that. I draw power from that. I draw some level of confidence from that. And I think we see the influence of social justice movements even in our universities. As such, though, there's still that thing of you get tired, even you still get tired, you get exhausted, and you just need to keep on rejuvenating yourself, or like trying to establish some sort of free space by actually engaging in ongoing, not necessarily dialogues, but just trying to find a space whereby you can just relax and let go. I don't know, but even that is an issue or something like that.
Thank you so much. I think there was a question that was posed in one of the sessions earlier on how I think Ntombo Vuyolinda was the one who spoke about it in the session on leadership. And she spoke there particularly on how the framing of young people has always been as problematic, as anarchist almost. You've alluded now to social justice movements and how they work almost to audit policies and to audit development and to audit its implementation and its impact on women in particular. But then I'd want to ask, maybe Nomta as well, who's worked in gender research, when do you start framing young people and women as the architects of policies rather than just the auditors, constantly making sure that they bring a backlash and point out the issues? How does that, where's that space? How does it look when you're involving then women and young people?
Okay, I think I'll try to. I think because we are not where policymakers are as young women, which is in parliament, we can't necessarily be there. Yes, we can be part of parliamentary committee meetings in order to influence what exactly is, put in policy, but we don't necessarily have the power, or rather the numbers, to be able to influence directly what exactly is adopted during that policy. So we can fight outside of those spaces on how that is executed. It's fine, policy is there, it's a framework, it's very broad, and we can actually creatively, as activists, creatively manipulate that to speak to what our needs and what our agenda is as young people. So we still have a space, and as much as we are kept out, we can still creatively do that through attending these different meetings, through writing, through actively taking the role to reclaiming our agency and reclaiming and seeing ourselves as autonomous people and not necessarily as people who things are done to. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Subsequent to what you're saying, Nangamso, I think it is also important to understand that leadership positions or
positions of power were not necessarily made with the woman in mind. So it is difficult for us to find spaces outside that advocacy through dialogues, through engagements, to be able to communicate infiltration in space ways to infiltrate those spaces. Subsequently, when you're speaking about a university that is even led by women, but the month of August is called Diversity Month instead of a Women's Month, when nationally it's known as a Women's Month. So it is through spaces of engagement outside that where we need to find dialogues, where we need to find engagements as to how do we infiltrate those spaces and make our voices heard.
Thank you, Sisizwe. Do you have anything to add on?
I think I also want to throw a specific dynamic of how young people change the way things are, especially on policy formulation. There's advocacy that young people undertake and change policies. For example, we've had policy on HIV, STI, and TB. It's the policy that's supposed to regulate how services are brought for young people in schools. We've had changes in that policy as a result of advocacy that has been led by young people themselves. They've been in that space where their views were heard through meaningful engagement of young people, and there's been changes to ensure that that policy is harmonized with the integrated school health policy. And I think young people have a role to play in that space, in influencing policy through dialogue when we hear their views, and ensure that their views are taken seriously and are actually influencing what is supposed to be in the policy. That's supposed, and I think that really has been great, because the HIV, STI, and TB policy, the 2017 one, it has put in integrated views of young people. They are there, together with civil society organizations that have been pushing for ensuring that services are brought to young people within the schools. Services for HIV prevention, services for family planning are brought into schools. It's been because of influences of young people in that space of policy formulation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your input. I'd actually want to ask Mahalia, as a woman in leadership, and this concept that's being shared by the panelists on how women then influence policy change from seats of power almost. You're sitting on the SRC, which is then the highest decision-making body of students. How do you feel that those type of spaces are conducive for changing policies and being able to influence, from a gender perspective, policies going forward of institutions and communities and so on?
So, are you basically asking that within the SRC, being a woman in SRC, how are we changing policies so that there are more women in that space? Okay, well, 2 weeks back, we had a workshop, right? SRC workshop, and we're busy with policies, right? Within the SRC, that something to do with the gender quota, you know? So that you don't find in the top 5, for example, you have only 1 woman and the rest are males. So we're busy with those policies and trying to implement them. So going to elections this year for next year, the incoming or SRC has a balanced gender quota. Yeah, thank you.
That's wonderful, and we're hoping that those will drive the type of changes that we'd like to see. I think even we think of who we're excluding by having this type of venue. If, for example, were we able to accommodate young mothers in this particular venue? Would we have been able to accommodate pregnant teens in this venue? So I think it's important that we ask ourselves those questions. And maybe just to close off then this particular session, if I could have some of the panelists thinking around ideas. Colleagues, I am aware that there is an appetite to engage, and we will engage. What I wanted to do was then just give panelists another opportunity if there's something that they wanted to hear. All right. So obviously this was part of employment and well-being, and I wanted to just pose a question to panelists, just to be able to share then any thoughts that they might have on a way forward and a solution for how women can then be included, almost an inclusive development, especially when it comes to employment. Any thoughts?
I think by posing the question like that, it's like you saying we should ask for permission to be included in spaces, and that already from your point of departure is already problematic. No, I think it's a matter of just asserting the fact that there is an agenda, there's a gendered agenda that we have, and it's now time to just execute. I think we just need to assert ourselves in whatever spaces we occupy and make sure that we open spaces as much as we can. I mean, with the little influence that we all have, there's a little bit that we can do to shape or rather to restructure wherever we are. I mean, we need to be really creative. We need to tap into, la intellect ingati dormant sometimes because of, we just need to tap into that and just, actively work towards, making spaces for ourselves and asserting ourselves and not asking for permission to be included. Thanks.
I'm captured now, I'm sorry. Just to add more to that, we just need to be deliberate and we just need to be intentional and we just need to be radical in our moves and in our voices in order for us to expand the spaces, the little spaces that we already have, to expand them and to be accommodative, to let other females to be in that space. So we need to be intentional, we need to be radical, we need to be deliberate in our voices.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if there is an appetite to still engage from the floor. In the 5 minutes that we do have left, I'm going to take the 3 urgent hands. I will take 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
One, two. Okay, this is a very sensitive question. And if I'm red at poverty-minded, it's fine. But I'll try to be politically correct. One, I want to touch on some points that Nati brought earlier this day or yesterday, where he said, where do we draw the line in terms of solidarity and criminalizing? As in the point of saying, the law teaches us to put people on jail and to take them to court. And where do we draw the line of putting solidarity into confine? Now, I am trying to say there are issues that are brought in DCs and in courts where gender-based violence has taken an overbearing effect and has mentally disturbed somebody. And when someone needs to rule to say the bright and the mighty of the law must take somebody into charge and nobody should undermine the law, the initiator of the case who was violated then drops the case, right? She drops the case. And we are told that we must be sympathetic. And this sympathetic, it has been routined. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. You are always sympathetic. And this gender-based violence is now growing to a volume that even the presiding officer is getting confused. Why are you dropping the case whenever the prosecutor has made a verdict and a charge? You always being sympathetic. That is not solidarity. That's undermining the law. Because it can be not a point that somebody violates a person and always the initiator will always switch off the case at the point where the judge needs to be served or when the process. And whenever I raise this question, I am told that, Mr. Dlamini, you are a male, you will never understand this because it's a female thinking. Try me to understand this. And if maybe I'm wrong, I once raised this question. Uyandisa will know, and the lady wearing a black coat will know. I once raised this question, and I was told that as a gentleman, it's a lady understanding and you won't have it. And I was told that, you know what, I'm not speaking out of opinion, I'm speaking out of fact that was spoken by people. I was told that we don't want to keep slips because the moment we drop or we happen to cancel this relationship, we move to another one, we get assaulted, we move to another one, we get assaulted. And at the end of the day, you have a report or a description of being violated. I think we should draw the line where we're becoming solidarity agents and where we're becoming straight facts to the point. Nobody should be at a point of undermining the law. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tandega Shabalala. Firstly, we must say that we don't appreciate how the panel is being run. It can't be that we are watching a TV show, we must receive opinions from the one side, and when we are supposed to interact, we are told about time. That is not fair. Secondly, I think we must all agree that South Africa must make gender-based violence an issue of national security. Look, I kind of hear what Lamine is saying, and it's probably one of those things where you feel like, yeah, maybe you are a male. And we must draw the line between ignorance and saying things that are not true are facts. Just because I say something and I'm learned doesn't mean it's a fact. Facts are tested, you know, and it becomes important that we become careful of what we say. In a lot of female spaces, when guys speak, women say, keep quiet because you don't understand. Because it's their speaking that makes us realize that they don't understand what we go through. Look, if someone is assaulted or harassed, it does not just affect them physically, it affects them psychologically and emotionally. And when you are going to say, and you go through a justice system that continues to abuse you, and you have to relive your situation over and over again, you tell it to the counselor, to the police, to the judge in some instances, and still people question you, ask you the most ridiculous questions, and you decide to drop the case. It's not because you wanted to, it's because you feel that no one believes you. And that is what becomes a problem. And again, the discussion, the level of the discussion does not change. It's a problem. You know, we say the same things with the same people, actually. You know, ever since I've been in this university, we've been speaking, okay? And we've been saying the same things, you know, and it's tiring. Look, South Africa is not that regressive in terms of women going up into leadership. We have, for instance, a female vice chancellor. If females were to come out and speak against something that the female vice chancellor has done, it would look like we are bashing her because it's a woman. We are expected not to be objective towards other women because they are women, and that is abusive. And then the same attitude, we must be able to say that, yes, we are women, we root for women, big up, we have a female SG of the SRC, but when the female SG of the SRC is not being a female, we must tell her, without fear of being said that we are pulling her down. And that's where I think our biggest problem is. We cannot differentiate between constructive criticism and pull her down. And we usually mistake it for the two and say that if I'm going to say, Nangamso, you are part, together with Nobu, you're part of the Memeza campaign. I don't think you guys are reaching out to as many people as you can. And these are the reasons I think that it's not that I'm pulling you down, it's my opinion. And you guys, you'd either receive it with a way of wanting to make the campaign better, or you'd receive it as, no, I'm pulling her down because I was part of the people that came up with the campaign or something like that. So I think masazini ukuthi sifunani Ne? If we're going to say that we want more women in positions to do what? Because it's not a guarantee that when someone is progressive, when they get to the position, they'll be progressive. It's not. And a perfect example, and I'm sorry to say it, is with the UCT-VC. We were all excited. We were all excited. But Professor Mayosi committed suicide. We know the circumstances and the environment that our black deans go into when they go and lead those departments. As much as we would celebrate that transformation of a head being black or female, there's that support system that continues to strain them. And her iterations were that, utterances, English. Her utterances were that he was getting pressure from FISMA's for students because they called him a sellout. So we're not supposed to call black people sellouts when they're selling out. And she's new. She understands how the system is running. And we would expect that black women would stand and say that, look, we go into these systems. And when we get there, you have bricks and bricks and bricks that are stopping you from being progressive. How do we then support each other to make sure that the bricks are trembling down like walls of Jericho, something like that? So I think that's what we should be doing. And again, we'd appreciate it if we get to read more about research, we get to hear people's experiences. I think people's lived experiences go a long way. And we're important, Nagiti, that we critique things we hear. Nomta is part of the gender studies now. Can we now be part of that situation of learning and unlearning a lot of things? Well, there's a lot to unlearn than to learn, because we have 20 years of learning bad behavior. Now you must unlearn everything, even things that you were taught in your household, So I think that is the contribution I have to give.
To yourself. Thank you very much. Again, I asked the House that may I please be allowed to sit down. My name is Noxie. I think the first thing that we must just acknowledge, and just a side note to the Dean of Students, is that the system always finds a way of responding to anything that seeks to challenge it. I just want even the SGD department to make a note of how even the program is structured. When we speak about the economy and money, it's always the first thing on the program, but when it's issues of gender and women, it's the last things on the program. So I think in future that should, change. Nomta speaks about how we must find, do we have women that have somehow healed or are strong enough so that they are able to heal others? I don't think we're going to find that anytime soon, because as much as we find a woman in a top position and has healed, issues of women become an injury every day. So the healing process never ends because the injuries reoccur. We're always going to have a problem with that. And I think to the SRC, SG, the issues regarding students, it would be very easy, supposedly, it's easy for a student leader to respond to them because they are still a student. So whatever that is regarding students, you would openly and speak about in anyhow because it's something that you relate to. Same applies with issues relating to women, even if we have differing opinions. I don't feel she answered Nobu's question because there was a lot of detach, and that's the problem that we have with student leadership is that I'm not sure if they no longer are students or they no longer understand student issues, because the moment they get into a position of power, they stop being students and they stop representing students. And I think that's why she responded in that manner. That's the great issue that we have with leadership throughout. Our leaders no longer represent us. That's why our leaders are unable to speak for us. Because even with the gender quota issue that she speaks of, that the SRC has currently started or supposedly started, I don't know. I think we've passed the discussion issue of gender quota being about 50-50 in terms of quantity, but it's quality. The 50% that we want in the position, what is it supposed to achieve? I say this all the time, we always celebrate the first Black women, but it's a problem when it's the first and last Black woman, you know? And that needs to be corrected, because she's a council member, and I thought that a part of the gender 50 quota, it would be illustrated in council, the discussion that she should be advocating for with the female vice chancellor, that representation in council as well, because it's understood and it's a prayer. I hope people still think that, I hope women still think like that, that as much as we would be in different avenues, we have that women agenda, you know, that unsaid women agenda that makes us relate to each other. Unangam, so I think would agree with me. We don't have to agree as women to appreciate each other's strengths and weaknesses, because it's even in the history. Feminists has always agreed. There's groupings in women. You have the old and the young that disagree. It doesn't mean that they're not women. You have modern feminism and traditional feminism. It doesn't mean that because there's that we don't agree. But lastly, as I land, you know, when we speak of gender, woman empowerment, and woman emancipation, and I appreciate dialogue. You know, dialogue is necessary. Dialogue is important. Just a silly example. Everyone is tired about talking about HIV and AIDS, but when you check the statistics, it's still sky high. That means that people don't learn, or still don't understand, or have not unlearned what they know, you know? So when we speak about these issues, I think more than the one thing that we need to do is decode. We need to decode and speak unto the many groupings of society. Does a woman that still finds comfort in cooking and being submissive to her husband, is she a traitor to feminism? You know, because some of the spaces, some of the things that they are comfortable with and is normal to them, to me is regressive and is problematic. So sometimes we need in our spaces to find the glue amongst ourselves. And I strictly do not believe in pull her down syndrome. I do believe in pull her down through him. I know for many, we have many examples of women faces, but men brains and men puppeteers behind us. And we are forced to celebrate, or it's disguised as women empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we've received quite a lot of input then from the floor, and I think it's going to assist us then in structuring our final comments going forward. But I'd like to ask if the mic could be rotated to the gentleman with the brown jacket on this side. And as it does so, I just want to note to the panelists that I think some important things have been said, and I think it structures then conversations for the future youth conventions as well, that these particular issues, women's issues in particular, are not seen then and dealt with, or even put in sessions where they're dealt with in a by-the-way fashion, but then they're categorized as serious issues on their own, probably at the beginning of each program. Thanks.
Hi, Reynolds Solomons again. I noticed there's no men on your panel. I find it a bit of a problem because I think that there are progressive men that can actually contribute to the conversation. Second point is we should not or we should not focus only on empowering women or putting the agenda, but also look at the role of men. So what is the role of men in this new agenda of women empowerment?
Thank you so much for pointing out the unbalanced gender aspect of the panelists. I would agree with you that we live in a world that's not made up of just women. But let's just be cautious that no discussion becomes advanced the minute we add men in it. It can still be advanced and still be very progressive with or without. I think we'll see the program before as well when we're discussing issues of employment, leadership and so on. There wasn't necessarily a gender neutrality there as well. And it didn't make the panelist or the entire conversation more or less or of a debate. All right, I'm going to hand over to the panelists just to close off with their final responses, if they do want to respond to anything that came from the floor.
Okay, I really like your comment because what we're trying to do here, we're trying to have men that are also championing our agenda with us, that are being partners with us. Because if you look at violence, for example, some women get beaten up for being progressive. That's an issue that is there. But I just want to say there is a lady that raised an issue of sharing household chores. We were speaking yesterday in a table during lunchtime with Prince, and Prince made a comment that there's microwaves these days, there's washing machines. So it's easier to share household chores. And we really want men to begin to have conversations with us in this fashion so that we really understand each other. Because when we talk gender, we're talking men, women, boys, and girls, because they are our partners. We really want to understand each other and to support each other more. And I really love it when you say we've got progressive men. We really have men that would look at our programs, that support us, that support what we're trying to champion as women. I really wanted also to refer you to a KPMG study, which I know you are university students. You may find time to look at this study. It's so interesting. It relates to us the cost of violence, what it costs us, the violence in our society. It costs us 0.9% of the national GDP, and that translates to 28 billion in 1 year, the cost of violence. So can you imagine if we all understand each other? We all understand what we're trying to do. And you find a male folk or a female folk that doesn't understand what we're saying when we talk gender equality. He thinks this lady next to me must have muscles as his. We're not talking that. You try and correct that. We really need men in our spaces together with us to fight for us what we're fighting for. Together, we need you. We need men and boys. We need boys and girls. But what we're saying is our voices need to be heard as women. We really need to be heard. And we do not want to be down there. Thank you.
Okay. I'll first start by answering the gentleman over there. I don't think it's our place to answer as to where men fit in. Men need to sort themselves out in isolation and then decide from the isolation if they can fit into our agenda. We are not going to put them into our planning because we are where we are now because of men. So, and men need to be understanding of places where women do not want to have them there, because men could also be triggers to women. So men need to be in silos and discuss their issues and sort themselves out first before they can start trying to get into our spaces. Because we've got situations in society where men learn about gender and use gender as a stepping stone to leadership positions. They preach gender, but then in isolation, they are still continuing to be patriarchal and continuing to be abusive towards women. So men need to sort themselves out aside before they can start thinking about getting into our circles. Yeah. And there was a comment, I think from the brother at the back over there, where he speaks about gender-based violence and the disciplinary hearing processes. I think it's also a role for us as students to interrogate the spaces that are supposed to be protecting students. Interrogating the spaces of security services, it's interrogating the spaces of psychology, because it is a tedious process to go through when you've been violated and you have to go through so many channels in order to make someone account. So we need to also interrogate, are those spaces effective enough in order to make the victim comfortable in that process? So before we can judge and say, no, the student dropped the case, we need to interrogate the procedure that was taken before the person decided to drop the case. Thank you. Okay. I think I'd like to answer the gentleman with the brown jacket first. The role of men. No, I'm going to summarize. The role of men in the struggle. Okay, there's a recognition of the fact that we don't exist in isolation. We know we don't exist in a vacuum. We know that we are because of whoever is around us, and we realize the fact that men are around us. We recognize that they're there. However, we also recognize the fact that they can also be triggers, I think, as Nomta alluded to us. In as much as it may seem like we are purposefully trying to disengage with men, it's not a disengagement that comes from just Njay wanting to disengage and not wanting to recognize their presence, but it's the fact that we realize that we also need to center ourselves. Our lives have been centered. Patriarchy teaches you to center men and to serve that agenda rather than the self. So now it's by recognizing, by putting only women on the panel, it's a space to not necessarily distract ourselves from centering ourselves, because there's a tendency, the minute you put a bit of a man anywhere, the conversation shifts completely, and we don't want that. And I think that's why, I hope that answers your question of why, but there's a role for men, but they must recognize it for themselves. Okay, I'd like to also answer Mr. Dlamini there at the back. You spoke about solidarity and criminality. So that, in my mind, that comes with social justice movements and whatever. How you pose your question is in a victim blaming mode. It shows the impatience you have for victims of violence. So it's more a reflection of your impatience rather than the person who is subjected to whatever violence that they go through. I think you also need to work on that. You need to ask yourself, why are you impatient with the fact that this woman chooses? Yes, why are you impatient with this woman's choices? Because choices are influenced by environments. We don't make our choices in isolation again. Things happen that make us decide the things that we decide, whether it be social, economic, emotional, or otherwise. And I think you must reflect back, wow, why are you so impatient or unwilling to recognize the fact that there are these other implications that come with having to go through these processes? Yeah. Tandek, I was just no one advocate, okay. Precariousness of well-being, Prof. Mayosi's suicide. I agree to the largest degrees of, I think I'll answer your question alongside what Noxie said, the fact that we should draw strengths, or in as much as we are different in our understandings of, Imam, do we truly know why Prof. Mayosi committed suicide? Do we truly know why that man did what he did? Because we seem to have this idea that, okay, in as much as we exist in institutions of higher learning, there are other factors that affect our lives. And it is not our place to be interrogating that. And we need to give that family the space to actually grieve and leave that man alone. Leave that entire, not yet, it's not ours yet to actually unpack, because we don't necessarily know or understand the circumstances of that. In as much as we can allude, or rather think, or we can think about why exactly it is why that happened, but we cannot decisively say this is why it happened. And my opinion, as Noxie said, you must draw you must accept the fact that I will have a different opinion, and there's still strength in my opinion as much as it is different from yours, and you need to accept it as it being valid. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the inputs, ne? I'm not sure who said it, but about women criticizing other women. I'd also like to pose a question on what is it when women actually bash at other women? Is it also criticism that other women must take it with care or in a positive manner? And also the role of men. Before men want to be part of the agenda, I think they should stop seeking for relevance within this women agenda. Yes, and lastly, someone also mentioned something about having so many dialogues, and it is very tiring. I think the next stop or the next thing that women should do now is the implementation plan, and actually in going forward with the struggle. Thank you.
One last thank you to my wonderful panel. We do have some small token of our appreciation. Please do not leave the stage. But otherwise, thank you so much for being such a receptive audience. I do know that we were well over the time that you had allowed us as per the program. Just to make you aware that tomorrow's program, if I am still correct, will start at 8 o'clock with the sign-in and coffee. And then at 9 o'clock, we'll have our first session. All right, so thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.